3 days ago, her eldest son died in this courtyard. He would give his share of porridge to his younger brothers and lied every evening, saying he'd already eaten. Then, one morning, he simply didn't wake up. His face looked so peaceful, as if he'd finally had his fill. Now his mother is gathering a final handful of millet for his memorial service. After that, there will be nothing left in the house. And just then, her second son collapses face down by the well. The cold hits his face like a fist. Seo Ju-hyeon lies with his cheek in the wet snow and can't breathe. His body won't obey him. His fingers are curled up and won't straighten. He jerks his head up and the world goes blurry. A woman with a gray face and sunken cheeks leans over him. She calls his name. It's a stranger's name. But the heart in his gaunt chest fluttered and recognized her before his mind could. Mom. Not his mom, and yet still a mother. He parts his cracked lips. No sound comes out. His vocal cords feel foreign and dry as an old rope. His mother grabs him by the shoulders with her slender hands, her grip as firm as iron. That's how you hold someone you're afraid of losing. He sits down. And then, inside his skull, two memories collide like two streams in a single channel. The 17-year-old boy who, just yesterday, was chewing on elm bark and watching his brother's funeral, and a 34-year-old man who was driving seed potatoes down an icy highway in Iowa. A pickup truck, a bridge, a river, a crash, darkness, and then that snow. This alien, starving body. He looks at his hands, slender wrists, blue fingernails, dirt and bark beneath them. He clenches his fists, unclenches them. His fingers obey. Poorly, but they obey. He stands up. His legs are shaking. His body feels as heavy as an empty sack. He estimates by eye, 45 kilograms, maybe less. Another week without food, and this body will lie next to his brother's. The thought comes cold and precise. For 15 years, he'd been able to gauge the condition of the soil at a glance. It turns out the human body can be read the same way. A deficit is a deficit. His father steps out onto the threshold, tall, even now that hunger has worn him down to the bone. He looks at his son by the well. He says nothing. He turns away. He goes back into the house. His father, long ago, stopped believing that anyone alive could change anything. And in the doorway, another face freezes in place, small, sharp, eyes that stare without blinking. So Minseo, his younger sister, 14 years old, skinny as a stick, but her eyes are piercing and alive. She looks at her brother as if she's calculating something inside her head. He notices this and remembers it. Later, not now. He enters the house and tells his mother not to cook the memorial porridge from the last of the millet. That his brother wouldn't have approved, that he knows where to get food by evening. His mother looks at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. In a way, he is. He turns to Minseo and says they're going into the forest. She doesn't ask why. She nods and picks up a wicker basket. In times of hunger, questions are a luxury. They walk out through the gate. The village of Sonnim lies at the foot of Mount Baekdusan, 6 households. There used to be 12. Half of them died off in 2 years. And this is where the strangest part begins. Ju-hyeon walks along, taking stock. Not the houses, the land, mountain soil, poor, but not dead. He can see it even through the snow, by the color of the stream banks, by the trees at the edge of the forest, alder, birch, pine. So the soil is acidic, but rich in organic matter. It's workable. If he survives until spring. He remembers, not with his own memory, with the memory of a boy. That stream over there, beyond the pine forest, which doesn't freeze even in the cold because it springs from beneath a rock. And there, under the snow, wild garlic, wild onions, vitamin C, iron, and the perfect food for a man on the brink. He quickens his pace. His body protests. His head is spinning. Who cares? Half an hour later, they reach the stream. He drops to his knees and digs through the snow with his bare hands. His fingers go numb instantly. Beneath the snow lies black, damp earth. And sprouting from the earth are green shoots, pale, thin, alive, wild garlic. He laughs, hoarse and strange in this silence. Minseo stares with wide eyes. Her brother is kneeling in the snow, laughing heartily at some kind of grass. He explains briefly, "It's food. We pick the leaves and stems. We don't touch the bulbs, so it can grow again." She stands up beside him and starts gathering. Her childish fingers work faster than his. Within an hour, the basket is full. He straightens up and looks over the hill. The boy's memory tells him there's an oak grove there. Acorns. Last year's acorns lie under the snow, wet and frozen, but still good. You can make flour from them. Soak them in 3 changes of water to remove the bitterness. Dry them, grind them. Porridge that keeps a person going. They walk toward the grove, and at the roadside he freezes. A pheasant lies under a pine tree, dead, frozen, its feathers covered in frost. The bird fell from a branch at night and didn't get up. He picks up the carcass, firm and light, but the meat hasn't gone bad. The frost has preserved it better than any refrigerator. Minseo looks at the pheasant, then at her brother, and a question flashes in her eyes, one she doesn't ask out loud. How do you know where to go? How do you know what to look for? Why do you walk through the woods as if you see things I don't? She turns away. They gather another half basket of acorns. The walk back is harder. His strength is running out. His body begs him to lie down and close his eyes. He won't let himself stop. He counts his steps, an old trick from field trips in Iowa. Don't think about the distance, just count. 1, 2, 3. They return before dark. His mother is waiting at the gate. She sees the basket and the pheasant. Her expression doesn't change. She stopped getting her hopes up too soon a long time ago. He sits down by the hearth. He tosses a log onto the fire. He takes his older brother's spoon. He grinds acorns between stones, pours in water, cooks up a small bowl. Acorn porridge with wild garlic. The aroma fills the house, green, pungent, lively. Minseo swallows. 11-year-old Ji-eun presses herself against her mother and can't take her eyes off the bowl. Her father sits silently in the corner. Ju-hyeon places the bowl in her older brother's spot. She sets his spoon next to it. Everyone is watching. He says this is Jin-ho's portion, that they'll eat after him. And then something breaks in her mother's face. A thin crack runs from her eyes to her lips. She cries silently. These aren't tears of grief. She cried out her grief 3 days ago. This is different. This is when you're held by the one you least expected, her middle son. He's always used to be quiet and unobtrusive, the one who followed his older brother like a shadow and never spoke first. Now he stands by the hearth and looks at her with eyes that hold something mature, warm, and unfamiliar. He divides the food, full bowls for his mother and sisters, half for himself, a full bowl for his father. He plucks and butchers the pheasant. His hands remember, not the hands of a boy, the hands of a man who butchered pheasants every fall on a farm in Iowa. The meat goes into the pot. By morning there will be broth, the best remedy for exhaustion. They eat in silence. The porridge tastes bitter from the tannins. The wild garlic has a sharp, onion-like aftertaste. But it's food. The first real meal in the house in 5 days. After dinner, he sits by the hearth and stares into the fire. The 2 memories have finally settled. He knows where he is. Hamgyong Province, North Korea. The year 1672. The Great Famine of the Gyeongsin year. The most terrible year of the 5. 300,000 dead. The province will lose 1/3 of its population. He had read about this in the archives while writing his dissertation on agrarian crises. And now he sits in one of the dying villages, in the body of a boy who has only a week left without him, together with his mother, together with his sisters, together with his father, who has half given up. He clenches his fists. His fingernails dig into his palms. The pain is real, so he must be real too. So all of this must be real. He closes his eyes and counts. Not steps, resources, land. 1.5 li of arable land registered in his father's name. It hasn't been plowed for 2 years because there's nothing to sow. a forest with game, wild garlic, and acorns, a stream with water that never freezes. That's important. Water is life. What's needed? Seeds. Any kind. Millet, buckwheat, barley, anything he can throw into the ground once the snow melts. Without seeds, all his knowledge is useless. An agronomist without seeds is like a blacksmith without iron. The snow will melt in 2 months. That means he has 2 months to find seeds, to prepare the land, and to keep his family from dying. He opens his eyes. His mother is sleeping, covering his sisters with her body. His father lies with his back turned to everyone. Ju-hyeon thinks about the Jerusalem artichoke seeds left in the trunk of the pickup truck at the bottom of the river. 7 years of breeding, a cold, hardy variety, perfect for this land. But they're down there, and he's here. Enough thinking about what isn't there. Think about what is. Wild garlic, acorns, a pheasant, 2 hands, and a mind that knows more than this entire county put together. That's enough. It has to be enough. He closes his eyes. Tomorrow is the first real day of his new life. In the morning, Ju-hyeon woke up in pain. His whole body ached as if he'd run a marathon. His thigh muscles were on fire. His shoulders refused to move. Yesterday's hike in the woods, which would have been a light stroll for Aaron's body, had cost this body half of its remaining strength. He lay on the mat and stared at the ceiling. He was counting. The calories burned yesterday, the calories from the porridge and wild garlic. The deficit was monstrous. He stood up. His knees buckled. He steadied himself. The broth in the pot had cooled and was covered with a thin film of fat. Pheasant fat. Gold. He carefully skimmed off the film with a wooden spoon and transferred it to a separate bowl. This fat will come in handy. For treating paper, for greasing leather, for cooking. Nothing can be thrown away. In this world, every gram of fat is worth a life. His mother was already on her feet. She stood by the hearth and looked at the pot of broth as one might look at a miracle. Last night, there was no food in this house. This morning, there was meat broth in the pot. Ju-hyeon divided the broth among the 5 of them. He took the smallest portion for himself. His father took a bowl in silence. He took a sip. He looked up. There was something in his eyes. Not gratitude, not faith, doubt, suspicion even. How does a boy know where to find wild garlic in winter? How does he know how to cut up a pheasant so neatly? His father didn't ask aloud, but Ju-hyeon read it in his gaze. He remembered. He needed to be more careful. After breakfast, he left the house and walked through the village of Sonnim, 6 households. There they were, the Seo household. That was his home. Next was the Park household, old man Park Yeon-su and his wife. Both were over 60, no children. Or rather, they'd had some, but they'd died a long time ago, even before the famine. The Han household, Han Dix, a sturdy man in his 40s with 3 sons, the wealthiest man in the village. He still had a sack of barley in his granary a month ago. Now, who knows? The Yoon household, blacksmith Yoon Tae-gil and his daughter Da-hee. His wife died 2 years ago. The blacksmith drinks whenever he can find something to drink, but he has golden hands. The Nam household, the Nam widow with 2 small children. Her husband left for the south in search of work half a year ago and never returned. He's most likely dead. The Cho household, empty since fall. The entire Cho family left for the south. The house stands with its door boarded up. Ju-hyeon made his way around all the households in an hour. He talked to people, or rather, he tried to. The boy's memory helped him. He knew these people. He knew their names. He knew who owed whom. He knew the old grudges and old debts. Old man Park let him in reluctantly. He was sitting on the ondol with his eyes closed. Park's wife was lying against the wall and wouldn't get up. She was sick. Ju-hyeon couldn't tell exactly what was wrong. He needed Songhwa, but Songhwa wouldn't show up until summer. If only he could make it until summer. He asked old man Pak about seeds. Was there anything in the granary? Old millet, barley, anything at all? The old man opened one eye. He looked at the boy as if he were crazy. He said the granary had been empty since the 10th month, that even the rats had left because there was nothing for them to eat either. Ju-hyeon didn't give up. He asked if he could take a look. The old man waved his hand. Go ahead. Paka's granary was small, made of mud brick. The roof had sagged. Inside, it smelled of dampness and dust, empty. Ju-hyeon got down on his knees and began to examine the floor, the corners, the cracks between the boards. There, in the far corner, under a rotten board, was a handful of something small. He dug it out. Old seeds, dry, small, millet, chumisa, to be precise. Maybe a handful and a half. They must have fallen here about 5 years ago and been forgotten. He gathered them in his palm. He examined them. The seeds were intact, no mold, no damage. The dry, cold corner had preserved them perfectly. The germination rate would be low, 30%, maybe 20%, but they were seeds, his first real seeds. He stepped out of the barn and showed them to Old Man Pak. The old man looked at the handful of millet and snorted. He said you couldn't even feed a sparrow with that. Ju-hyeon replied that he wasn't planning to feed a sparrow. He was going to plant them. The old man shook his head. Fool. The soil is dead. Nothing will grow. Ju-hyeon didn't argue. He bowed. He thanked him. He left. The handful of seeds lay in his pocket and warmed his hand like a piece of coal. The Khan's courtyard gave him an even colder welcome. Khan Deok-su stood at the gate with his arms crossed. He looked healthy. Even now, when everyone had lost weight, he looked sturdy. His sons stood behind him. The eldest, Ha-eun, the middle one, Minu, the youngest, Tae-yang. All three were bigger than Ju-hyeon. The Khan asked what he wanted. His voice was rough, impatient. Ju-hyeon spoke plainly. He was looking for seeds, or a tool, or both. He was ready to trade. For what, exactly? For knowledge. He knew where to find wild garlic in the forest. Han was silent. Then he laughed. So, the little boy has come to trade herbs. His sons laughed too. The eldest, Ha-eun, watched without a smile. His gaze was heavy, like that of a bull deciding whether to gore or not. Ju-hyeon didn't back down. He pulled a bunch of wild garlic from his bosom, which he'd set aside on purpose, and placed it in front of Khan. He said it was a down payment. Let him try it. If he liked it, they'd talk tomorrow. Khan looked at the wild garlic. He sniffed it. He knew this herb. Everyone did. But it isn't harvested in winter. In winter, it's buried under the snow, except in places where the water doesn't freeze. Han understood that too. So the boy knew such a place. That in itself was valuable. Han silently took the wild garlic. He nodded. Ju-hyeon left. Blacksmith Yoon's yard. Things were more interesting here. The blacksmith was sitting at the anvil, sharpening something, a knife or a sickle. A girl dressed in men's clothes was bustling about nearby. Yoon Da-hee, 16 years old. Her hands were covered in soot. Her hair was tied back with a rag. Her face looked angry. She saw Ju-hyeon and grimaced. The boy's memory kicked in. Da-hee thought of Ju-hyeon as a quiet, wimpy type. She was used to boys who fought and yelled. But Ju-hyeon had always been the type to sit in the corner and say nothing. The blacksmith looked up. His face was puffy. His eyes were cloudy. He'd been drinking yesterday. It wasn't clear what he'd been drinking. Probably some kind of moonshine. Ju-hyeon didn't beat around the bush. He asked the blacksmith if he had any old tools, broken ones, unwanted ones, tool tips, staples, anything made of iron. The blacksmith looked at him for a long time. Then he said he had iron, but nothing to eat. That was the whole deal. Ju-hyeon nodded. He said he'd bring some pheasant broth in the evening, in exchange for the right to rummage through the pile of old iron behind the workshop. Da-hee snorted. She said there was nothing useful in the pile, just rust and scrap. Ju-hyeon replied that rust and scrap. Da-hee looked at him with that expression that clearly said, "You're definitely a fool." The blacksmith shrugged. Broth it is, then. The deal was done. That evening, Ju-hyeon brought the promised broth. The blacksmith drank it all in a minute. Da-hee ate more slowly. She dipped a piece of dry flatbread into the broth and chewed it thoroughly. Ju-hyeon rummaged through the pile of scrap metal behind the workshop. He dug through it with his hands, rusty nails, a fragment of a sickle, a piece of some kind of fastener. And there it was, an old plowshare, cracked down the middle, unsuitable for plowing, but it could be made into 2 knives, or a hoe blade, or pike tips. Iron is iron. He pulled out the plowshare and showed it to the blacksmith. He asked if it could be reforged. The blacksmith looked at it. He said it was possible, but the coal was running out. Reforging was expensive, more expensive than a bowl of broth. Ju-hyeon nodded. He said he'd pay. Not now, in the spring, when the first harvest comes in. The blacksmith laughed. He said that by spring, they'd all be in the ground. Not on the ground, but in the ground. Ju-hyeon didn't laugh. He looked the blacksmith in the eyes and said nothing. The blacksmith stopped laughing. There was something in those eyes. Something you don't see in 17-year-old boys. Seriousness. Not desperate, but calm. Like that of a man who knows exactly what he's saying. The blacksmith grumbled that he'd think about it. Ju-hyeon took the plowshare and left. Da-hee watched him go. On the way back, he stopped by Widow Nam's house. That was the worst of it all. The house was cold. The ondol wasn't heated. 2 children sat by the wall, wrapped in rags. A boy of about 6 and a girl of about 4. Both were quiet, too quiet. The widow sat across from them, staring into space. She wasn't really there. She had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, to a place where she didn't have to worry about what to feed her children tomorrow, because tomorrow might never come. Ju-hyeon sat down beside her. He didn't ask any questions. He took a bundle from his bosom, wild garlic and a handful of acorns, and placed it in front of her. He said he'd come to check on her. The widow looked at the food, then at him. Her eyes were lifeless, but her hands reached for the bundle. A mother's instinct is stronger than despair. She took the acorns and began sorting through them, automatically, just as she had done 1,000 times in her past life, before the famine. Ju-hyeon told her he'd bring more tomorrow morning, and that if she wanted, she could come to their yard. His mother would teach her how to make porridge from acorn flour, a simple phrase. Come to us, a simple invitation. But for a person who had been sitting alone for half a year in a cold house with 2 silent children, these words meant more than a sack of rice. The widow nodded, a single movement, but a lively one. Ju-hyeon returned home after dark. He sat down by the hearth. He laid out the day's haul before him. A handful of chumisa seeds from Old Man Park's granary, an old plowshare from Blacksmith Yoon's pile. Hans promised that they'd talk tomorrow. The widow Nam's nod. Not much, almost nothing. But yesterday he didn't even have that. Minseo sat down beside him, silently. She watched as he sorted through the seeds. Then she spoke softly. She said he had changed, that he used to never visit the neighbors, that he used to not know where wild garlic grew, that he used to not know how to butcher a bird. Her voice was without fear, without accusation, just a statement of fact. Ju-hyeon froze. 2 seconds. 3. Then he turned to her, looked into her eyes, the serious eyes of a 14-year-old girl who had matured 10 years over the past year. He told her the truth. Not the whole truth, but the truth. He said that when he fell by the well, something happened in his head, that he saw things, knowledge, as if someone had planted them in his skull. He doesn't know why. Maybe a mountain spirit, maybe it was delirium from hunger. But the knowledge was real. The wild garlic was real. The porridge was real. And everything he would do from now on would be real too. Minseo listened. She nodded. A single movement, just like Widow Nam's, but with a different meaning. Not acceptance, a decision. She decided to believe him. Or at least she decided not to interfere. She asked one thing. She asked what she should do. Ju-hyeon thought for a moment. Then he said, "Remember everything. Everything I say, everything I do. If something happens to me, you need to know enough to carry on." Minseo's eyes widened for a moment. Then they narrowed. She understood. Not the words, the subtext. Her brother was preparing for the possibility that he might not survive, and he wanted to pass on his knowledge to someone. She nodded a second time. Night. The wind outside the wall. Stars peeking through the cracks in the roof. Ju-hyeon lay there, thinking about tomorrow. He needed to go back to the stream for wild garlic. He needed to start soaking the acorns properly. 3 soaks. The first, cold, for 6 hours. The second, warm, for 4. The third, cold again, overnight. Then drying, then grinding. I need to find more seeds. Any seeds. Go to the surrounding villages if I have to. Trade knowledge for supplies. wild garlic for seeds. On the fourth day, a frost set in, a real one, the kind that cracks the bark on trees and freezes the ground to the depth of a palm. Ju-hyeon woke up because he couldn't feel his toes. The ondol had gone cold. We'd run out of firewood last night. His mother and sisters were sleeping in a blanket under every rag in the house. His father lay separately, curled up, his breath a white mist. Ju-hyeon got up. His body refused to move. Every joint protested. He pulled on everything he could find and went outside. The frost hit his face like an icy wall. The air was dry and biting. The snow crunched under his feet so loudly that it seemed the whole valley could hear it. First thing, firewood. Without firewood, the temperature in the house would drop below freezing by evening. His sisters wouldn't survive the night. He headed for the forest. There was no axe, just a small, blunt knife, almost useless. But after the storm, fallen branches lay scattered throughout the forest. Deadwood and windfall. He didn't need an axe to gather what had already fallen. For 2 hours, he hauled branches, piling them against the wall of the house. His hands froze until he lost all feeling. He warmed them with his breath. Then he'd pick up the branches again. By noon, there was a 3-day supply of firewood stacked against the wall. Not firewood in the full sense of the word. Small fallen branches and dry twigs. They burn quickly. They don't give off much heat, but it's better than nothing. His mother lit the hearth. The house began to warm up. Minseo helped break the branches into pieces of the right size, silently, intently. His father didn't come out of the house. After lunch, the frost receded, just a little. Ju-hyeon took advantage of this. He went to the Choi house, that very one, the empty one, the boarded-up one. The family had left for the south in the fall. The house stood lifeless, with its door and windows boarded up. He walked around the house. He peered through the cracks. The walls were intact. So was the roof. Logically, the inside should be empty. But people fleeing famine don't take everything with them. They take what they don't. They leave behind the heavy stuff. He pried a board off the back door. The nails came out easily. The wood was rotten. He went inside. It was dark. It smelled of dampness and mice. He waited for his eyes to adjust. An empty house, bare walls, mats rolled up in the corner, pots, 2 intact ones and 1 cracked, a basket with a hole in it, something on the shelf near the ceiling. He reached up, a small bag, lightweight. He opened it, seeds inside, tiny dark peas. He held it up to the light streaming through the doorway. Buckwheat. It was buckwheat, maybe 2 handfuls, maybe 3. The Cho family had forgotten it, or chosen not to take it. To them, it was trash, a handful of old seeds. To Ji-eun, it was gold. Buckwheat, Phagopyrum esculentum. It grows in poor soil. It doesn't require much water. The growing season is 60 to 70 days. You can plant it late and still harvest it before the frosts. The perfect crop for the first season. He stood in an empty, unfamiliar house, holding a small bag of seeds in his hands, and his hands were shaking, not from the cold. From the fact that, for the first time in 4 days, he felt that it might work out, that there was a chance. A tiny one, but a real one. He searched the house thoroughly. He found something else, a roll of paper, waxed paper, the very kind used to seal windows and doors. The paper was old and torn in places, but most of it was intact, oiled paper. He sat down on the floor and laughed, quietly, to himself. Oiled paper is a greenhouse, a frame made of poles, oiled paper on top. Sunlight passes through. The heat stays inside. The simplest technology. In 200 years, they'll call it a cold greenhouse, and he's going to build it now. In 1672, made from paper left behind by the family that had fled, he took everything useful. A small bag of buckwheat, paper, whole pots, a basket, even the mats. He carried it all back in 2 trips. On his second trip, Deok-su was standing at the gate to the Cho family's courtyard. He watched in silence. Then he said it was a sin to take what didn't belong to him. Ju-hyeon stopped. He looked at Han. He replied that the Chois had left, that the house was empty. that in a year it would be buried in snow and everything inside would rot, and that if Han considered this a sin, then let him say so to the 2 children of the widow Nam, who had woken up this morning in a house that hadn't been heated. Han remained silent. His face was inscrutable. Then he did something Ju-hyeon hadn't expected. He went into the Choi house and came out with 2 floorboards, good ones, sturdy ones, and tossed them to Ju-hyeon. "For firewood," he said briefly. He turned and walked away. That evening, Ju-hyeon sat in the circle and laid out his finds, a handful of chumitza from Old Man Park, a small bag of buckwheat from the Choi household, greasy paper, an old plowshare, 2 pots, the floorboards from Han. His mother looked at it all and didn't understand why. Seeds in winter, paper, rusty iron. Her son had gone mad from hunger, that's what she thought. She didn't say it, but she thought it. Ju-hyeon could see it in her eyes. He didn't bother to explain. It was too soon. Words without proof are worthless. He had to show her. Tomorrow. His father was sitting in the corner, planing something, some kind of stick. He ran the knife pointlessly across the wood. His hands moved of their own accord. His mind was somewhere far away. Ju-hyeon approached him, sat down beside him, remained silent for a moment. Then he spoke, not about the seeds, not about plans, about the land. He asked his father about the field, that very one, a li and a half beyond the stream, registered in the name of So Byung-gu. His father looked up. For the first time in days, something alive flashed in his eyes. The land, his land, the only thing he had left from his grandfather and his father. He replied in a hollow voice. He said the field was dead. It hadn't been plowed for 2 years. Weeds, then snow. The soil was gone. Rocks had pushed their way up. It was useless. Ju-hyeon listened. He nodded. Then he said one sentence. He said the land wasn't dead. It was tired, like a person who hadn't eaten in a long time and had gone to lie down. But if you fed him properly, he'd get back up. His father looked at him for a long time. Then he turned away and picked up his stick again. But Ju-hyeon noticed. His hands had stopped moving aimlessly. They were planing more evenly, with purpose. Maybe tomorrow his father would ask what it meant to feed the earth. Maybe not. But the seed was already in the ground. Another seed, a word, an idea. That night, Ju-hyeon couldn't sleep. He sat by the hearth and drew with a stick on the hard-packed earthen floor. A plan of the yard, the house, the yard, the fence, the spot behind the house where the sun beats down on the south wall from morning until noon. The warmest spot in the yard. This is where the greenhouse will be. A small one, 1 meter by 2. A frame made of poles, oiled paper on top. Inside, a raised bed of soil mixed with ash and manure. Manure. Where to get manure? Khan has 2 goats, the only livestock in the village. Goat manure, a great thing. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, trace elements. If mixed with ash and soil, it makes a growing medium in which anything will grow. I need to make a deal with Khan. Trade something for manure. What? Wild garlic, acorns, labor, knowledge. He sketched and calculated. Timelines, temperatures, days until germination, days until the first leaf, days until harvest. If we set up a greenhouse in a week and sow radishes and salad mustard in it, the first greens will be ready in 25 days. Fresh greens in winter. In a world where people eat tree bark, that will be proof, not of words, but of possibility. Minseo lay nearby. She wasn't asleep. He knew she wasn't asleep. She listened to the stick scratching against the ground. She memorized it. In the morning, there would be nothing but dirty lines on the floor, but a map would remain in Minseo's mind. He was counting on it. It wasn't for nothing. On the morning of the 5th day, he began building a greenhouse. He chopped down 4 poles in the forest with a dull knife. Each pole took an hour of work. The calluses on his palms burst by the 3rd one. Blood mixed with bark and resin. He didn't stop. He brought the poles into the yard. He dug them into the ground behind the house, near the south wall. He tied them together with a rope. The frame turned out crooked and flimsy. Da-hee saw this from the blacksmith's yard. She crossed the road. She stood and watched as he tried to tie on the crossbar. She watched in silence for 3 minutes. Then she said he was tying it like a woman. She took the rope from him. She retied it. The knot turned out strong and even, the hands of a blacksmith's wife. She was used to working with materials. Ju-hyeon thanked her. Da-hee snorted, but she didn't leave. She stood there watching to see what would happen next. He stretched the oiled paper over the frame. He secured it with stones along the edges. It worked. It was crooked, the paper sagged in one spot, but it worked. A box made of poles and paper, transparent on top, closed on 3 sides, open on the south side toward the house wall. Da-hee asked what it was. Ju-hyeon answered with a single word, a house for plants. Da-hee snorted. She said that plants don't live in houses, they live in the ground. Ju-hyeon replied that these would live in both places. Da-hee tapped her temple with her finger, but she didn't leave. She stood there watching. She was curious, even if she didn't want to admit it. The most important thing remained, the soil inside the greenhouse. Ordinary soil wouldn't do. It was frozen and lifeless. They needed a growing medium. He had ash. His mother used to collect ash from the hearth and pile it in a corner of the yard. An old habit, from the days when ash was used for laundry. Soil. He dug it up from under the shed where it hadn't frozen. Soft, dark, manure. He went to see Khan that evening. The conversation was brief. Ju-hyeon proposed a trade. Every morning he would bring Khan a bunch of wild garlic and a handful of acorn flour. Khan would give him a bucket of goat manure a day. Khan thought for a minute. Then he nodded. Manure is trash. Food is life. Exchanging trash for life. A good deal. He mixed everything together. Soil, ash, manure. He eyed the proportions. Roughly 3 parts soil, 1 part ash, 1 part manure. He mixed it with his hands. The substrate was warm from the manure, a good sign. The microorganisms were working. They were giving off heat, even in the cold. He poured the substrate into the greenhouse. He smoothed it out. He watered it with water from the stream. Warm water he'd heated in a pot on the hearth and brought over. The greenhouse was ready, small, pathetic, 1 meter by 2, a crooked frame, crumpled paper, a dirty mixture inside. But it was a greenhouse, the first in this country, 300 years earlier than it was supposed to appear. He didn't have any radish seeds, or salad mustard seeds either. But there was chumisa, and there was buckwheat. No, you can't put chumisa or buckwheat in a greenhouse. They're for the field, for spring. There aren't enough of them. Every single seed counts. The greenhouse needs something else, something that grows quickly, something that produces greens rather than grain. On the 10th day, the widow Nam came to the village. She wasn't alone. She had 2 children with her. The boy, Isu, walked by himself. The girl, Bo-mi, sat on her mother's back. The widow stood at the gate to the Seo family's yard and hesitated to enter. Ju-hyeon's mother came out to meet her. She looked at her. Then, without a word, she picked up Bo-mi and carried her into the house. The widow followed. She hadn't come to visit. She had come because the ondol in her house was no longer warm, because they had run out of firewood 5 days ago, because the children had stopped crying, and that was worse than when they were crying. Ju-hyeon returned from the forest with another basket of wild garlic and saw unfamiliar shoes in the courtyard. He went inside. There were 6 people sitting in the house instead of 5, or rather 7 because Bo-mi counts 2. His mother looked at him. There was a question in her gaze. He nodded, without a word. His mother understood. She immediately poured broth into bowls for the widow and the children. His father was sitting in the corner. He was silent. But when Isu sat down next to him and pressed himself against his side, his father didn't move away. He placed his hand on the boy's head, a heavy hand, awkward, but warm. Now there were 7 mouths to feed. There wasn't enough food left. A problem. Ju-hyeon did the math. Wild garlic from the forest provided vitamins and minerals, but it had almost no calories. Acorn flour provided starch, but the supply of acorns under the snow wasn't endless. There had been only 1 pheasant, and it had been eaten 3 days ago. 2 months until spring. 7 people. We need a source of protein, a steady one, a reliable one. Meat. or fish, or eggs, chickens. It clicked in his head. Han Deok-su. He has 2 goats. Maybe he has chickens too, or used to, or maybe he knows someone who does. No, wait. Chickens don't lay eggs in winter. The days are short, not enough light, not enough feed. A chicken that doesn't eat doesn't lay eggs. That's a given. But if you feed a chicken and give it light, it'll start laying even in winter. A heated chicken coop, a lamp. No lamps, no kerosene. But there are fat lamps. A wick in the fat gives off light. Dim, but enough for the chickens. 14 hours of daylight, and the chicken thinks it's spring. He went to see Khan. The conversation was different from the ones before. Khan was sitting in his yard, repairing the fence. His sons were hauling logs. The Khan's yard was sturdier than the others. The fence was intact. The roof had been repaired. The granary was locked. The Khan lived better than anyone else in the village, not because he was luckier, but because he was tougher. He saved every grain. He didn't give anyone anything extra. People didn't like him for that. But in a year of famine, being disliked is the price of survival. Ju-hyeon approached and asked directly, "Do you have any chickens, Han?" Han looked at him, squinting. He replied that he had 3, barely alive. They hadn't laid any eggs since fall. There was no feed. He'd soon slaughter them for meat. Ju-hyeon told him not to slaughter them. He said he could make the chickens start laying eggs in the winter. Han watched. He was silent. 3 seconds. 5. Then he asked how. Ju-hyeon explained. Simply, no Latin terms, no agronomic calculations. A hen doesn't lay eggs because she thinks it's winter. She measures the day by the light. If you make the day longer for her, she'll decide it's spring and start laying eggs. You need a warm place and light, a fat tray, 14 hours, and feed. Wild garlic, acorn meal, that's enough. Khan listened. His face was inscrutable. Then he asked one question. He asked where the boy knew all this from. Ju-hyeon answered the same way Minseo had. He fell by the well. Something happened in his head. The knowledge came. He doesn't know where from, but it works. The wild garlic works. The greenhouse will show results in 10 days. If Han waited those 10 days with the chickens and saw that greens were growing in the greenhouse, then they'd have a serious talk. Han thought. For a long time. He wasn't stupid. He was cautious. There's a huge difference. A stupid person would have refused right away. A cautious person waits, watches, checks. Han said he'd wait. 10 days. If, in 10 days, even a single blade of grass grew in that silly paper shack, he'd give 1 chicken. 1, not 3. Ju-hyeon nodded. 1 chicken. That's a start. The days dragged on, monotonous and heavy. Every morning began the same way. Get up, light the hearth, check the greenhouse, water it, air it out for half an hour, close it. Go into the forest for wild garlic and deadwood. Come back. Prepare food. Feed the 7 of them. Soak acorns in the evening. Change the water. Dry the flour. Go to bed. Not sleep. Think. Count. Plan. His body was getting used to it. Slowly. Painfully. But it was getting used to it. His muscles ached less. His hands grew calloused. The blisters healed and hardened. He ate very little. On purpose. He gave the lion's share to the widow's mother and children. Minseo noticed. She said he should eat more. What if he collapsed? The rest wouldn't make it. She was right. He added half a bowl's worth to his portion. No more. On the 7th day, the first sprout appeared in the greenhouse, a green shoot of wild garlic. Thin, pale, but alive. Ju-hyeon stood over the greenhouse and watched. Minseo stood beside him. She came over. She looked. She touched the paper. She peered inside. She saw a green stem in the black soil. Her face twitched. She didn't say anything. She turned around and went into the house. A minute later, she came out. In her hands was a small clay pot. She placed it next to the greenhouse. There was water inside, slightly warm. She watered the sprout, carefully, with her own hands. Ju-hyeon looked at his mother and swallowed. She believed. Not in words, in the sprout. By the 9th day, there were already 6 sprouts. The wild garlic was growing rapidly in the warm soil. The stinging nettles had also begun to sprout. 2 of the 3 rhizomes had produced pale shoots, winter greens in a paper greenhouse. The impossible had become possible. On the 10th day, Han Deok-su arrived, alone, without his sons. He walked silently up to the greenhouse. He crouched down, peered inside. He looked for a long time. Then he stood up. He looked at Ju-hyeon. He didn't say anything about the chicken. Instead, he asked something completely different. He asked if it was possible to make a second one just like it, a bigger one, in his yard. Ju-hyeon didn't smile. He wanted to, but he didn't. He said it was possible, if Han provided the materials and the labor. Han nodded. That evening, he sent his eldest son, Hwang, with a chicken under his arm. The chicken was skinny and vicious. Its feathers were ruffled. Its eyes were wild. Hwang set it on the ground and said his father had told him to pass on a message, and that if the chicken died, Han would come personally to demand an explanation. Ju-hyeon took the chicken. He examined it, emaciated but healthy. Its beak was clean. Its eyes were bright. Her legs had no growths. Her comb was pale but not blue. She'd live. She'd lay eggs too, if he fed her and provided her with light. He set up a chicken coop in the corner of the house. His mother was against it. A chicken in the house. Dirt. Smell. Ju-hyeon explained that outside, the chicken would freeze to death, and then Han would come looking for answers. His mother relented. The chicken coop was small, a box made of planks that Han had given him. Inside was straw. A tallow lamp with a wick burned nearby, casting a dim, flickering light. It was enough for the chicken. He fed the chicken wild garlic and acorn flour mixed with water. Nettles came in handy too, young shoots from the greenhouse. The chicken ate greedily. By the 3rd day, she had stopped fluttering about and settled quietly in a corner of the nest. She had gotten used to it. On the 5th day, Minseo ran into the house with such a look on her face that her mother jumped up and clutched her heart. Minseo was holding an egg in her hand. Warm, white, small. The first egg in 3 months, in winter, inside the house. Her mother took the egg and held it with both hands, just as one would hold a newborn. Her eyes were wet. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were just wet. His father stood by the wall and watched. His face looked strange, like that of a man who'd been slapped and kissed at the same time. His son was doing the impossible, and it was both good and humiliating at the same time. Good because the family was eating, humiliating because he was the head of the family, yet it was a little boy who was saving everyone. Ju-hyeon saw this. He understood. He didn't press the issue. When they were cooking porridge that evening, he cracked an egg into his father's bowl, not into his own, not into the communal one, into his father's. He said briefly, "Father needs his strength. We'll be plowing in the spring." His father looked at the egg in the bowl, then at his son. He said nothing. He ate it. The widow Nam began to help with the housework, silently, without being asked. In the morning, she washed the pots. In the afternoon, she helped mother sort through acorns. In the evening, she put the children to bed. She was slowly coming back to life, like a tree after a fire. The roots were intact, the trunk was charred, but the buds were sprouting. Her son, Isu, followed Minseo around like a puppy. Minseo didn't shoo him away. She gave him tasks. Bring some water. Hold the basket. Count the sprouts in the greenhouse. The boy carried them out with the seriousness of a general. Bomi began to laugh, quietly, rarely, but she laughed. Ju-hyeon's mother heard that laughter and froze for a second every time, as if she were remembering something from a time when laughter was an everyday occurrence rather than a special event. On the 12th day, Ju-hyeon began building a greenhouse for Han. He went to Han's yard with Da-hee. Yes, with Da-hee. The blacksmith's wife tagged along on her own. She said that the greenhouse in Seo's yard was as crooked as a drunken fence, and that she wouldn't allow such a disgrace in Han's yard. Ju-hyeon didn't argue. Da-hee worked. He told her what to do. She did it, quickly, precisely. Her hands knew the material. The frame turned out even, sturdy. She stretched the paper tight as a drum, not a single crease. Han stood and watched. His sons stood and watched. The youngest, Tae-young, quietly asked his brother Min-woo why the girl was building better than they were. Min-woo gave him a slap on the back of the head. Han filled the greenhouse with growing medium according to Ju-hyeon's recipe: soil, ash, goat manure. Ju-hyeon gave him a few wild garlic bulbs and nettle roots. Han accepted them, silently, without thanks, but without mockery either. Something began to grow between them. Not friendship, professional respect, recognition of usefulness. In a world of hunger, that's worth more than friendship. On the evening of the 14th day, when everyone was asleep, Ju-hyeon sat by the hearth and sketched a plan of the field on the ground. 1.5 li, about half a hectare, divided into 3 parts. The first for buckwheat, the second for chumiza, the third for green manure fallow. Sow wild clover on the third part. Let it grow. Let it build up mass. Plow it under in the fall. Green manure. Nitrogen will return to the soil. In a year, the third part will be the best. And then the rotation. The first will be fallow. The second will be for grain. The third will be for a new crop. A classic 3-field crop rotation. Medieval Europe figured this out in the 9th century. In 17th century Korea, they were still plowing the same field every year until it died. Then they'd abandon it and move on to a new one. Slash and burn logic, devastating for the soil. He paused. He'd gone too far off on a tangent. Right now, the main thing was to make it to plowing season. Then there would be crop rotation. Then. He looked up from the floor and saw his father. So Byung was standing by the wall, looking at the drawing on the floor, silently. His face was unreadable. Then he walked over, sat down beside him, looked at the lines, the crosses, and the sticks. He asked quietly. He asked what it was. Ju-hyeon froze. His heart began to beat faster. His father had asked a question, the first one in 2 weeks. He answered calmly, saying it was a field plan. The end of the 2nd month. The frost had eased up. It hadn't gone away completely, but it had receded. During the day, the temperature rose above 0. The snow began to settle, heavy, wet, and loose. The stream behind the village swelled and gurgled louder. Spring was still far off, but the earth could already feel it. Ju-hyeon could too. His body had grown stronger over those weeks. Not by much. He was still thin and light, but his ribs no longer jutted out so sharply. The muscles in his arms and legs were becoming more defined. Acorn, porridge, and eggs were doing their job. Protein was rebuilding what hunger had destroyed. The greenhouse was working. The 2nd crop of wild garlic had grown and been harvested. The nettles had spread and were yielding greens every week. The 3rd batch of bulbs had begun to sprout. Khan's greenhouse was also working. Khan went to it every morning and every evening. He would crouch down and look inside. His wife, whom Ju-hyeon had only glimpsed briefly, began to go out into the yard and pick nettles for soup. A quiet woman, unobtrusive, but her hands were skilled, and she made good soup. Han didn't say so, but Hanul once let slip that, for the first time that winter, his mother was cooking something other than bark. The hen laid an egg every other day, consistently, sometimes 2 days in a row. The light and feed worked like clockwork. Ju-hyeon gave every 3rd egg to Han, payment for the manure. Han took them in silence. He considered it fair. The Seo family's yard had changed, unnoticed by those who saw it every day. But Ju-hyeon saw the difference. A greenhouse with green sprouts stood by the wall. In the corner of the yard, acorns were drying on a wooden frame that Da-hee had made. The house smelled not only of smoke, but also of food. Nettle soup, acorn porridge, wild garlic, a chicken clucked in its cage. The children of the widow Nam ran around the courtyard. His mother hummed by the hearth, quietly, to herself. An old song that Ju-hyeon didn't know, but the boy inside him remembered. He listened and didn't interrupt. It was evening. Ju-hyeon sat on the porch and watched the sunset. The sky was orange and cold, beautiful. Minseo came out and sat down beside him. She was silent. Then she said that a merchant would come tomorrow. Ju-hyeon turned to her. What kind of merchant? Minseo explained. Every year at the end of the 2nd month, a traveling merchant passes through Sonnim. One of those who travel through the northern villages, trading salt for furs. An old man. His name is Pil-gi. He's coming from Gyeongsong. Usually he has salt, sometimes cloth, sometimes seeds. Seeds? Ju-hyeon jumped up. He asked if it was definitely tomorrow. Minseo nodded. It's the same time every year, give or take 2 days. But he always comes, even in a famine year. Because in a famine year, salt triples in price. And the merchant, loves money more than life itself. Ju-hyeon didn't sleep all night. He was thinking, what to offer the merchant? No money, no silver. There's acorn flour. There's dried wild garlic. There's knowledge. Knowledge is valuable, but not to a merchant. A merchant sells goods, not ideas. He needs something tangible. In the morning, he went to the blacksmith. Yoon Tae-gil was sitting at the anvil, forging something small, nails. Da-hee was pumping the bellows. His face was smudged with soot. His hands were black. Ju-hyeon asked the blacksmith point blank if he could reforge a broken plowshare into a knife, a good one, a sturdy one, in 1 day. The blacksmith looked at him, then at the plowshare that had been lying in the corner of the workshop for 2 weeks already. He asked why it was so urgent. Ju-hyeon told him about the merchant. A good knife made from a reforged plowshare could be traded for seeds. The blacksmith thought for a moment. Then he said that the coal was running out. 1 reforging would use up the entire supply. The knife would take 100, a full day's work, and the last of the coal. Ju-hyeon said he knew where to get charcoal, wood charcoal, from birch. Birch charcoal burns hotter than oak. He'd seen a birch grove beyond the second hill. If they cut down 3 trees and burned them in a pit, they'd have enough charcoal for a month's work. The blacksmith listened. His eyes shifted. The boy knew about charcoal, about the burning temperature, about the difference between birch and oak, where it came from. The blacksmith didn't ask. He didn't care where it came from. What mattered to him was that it was true. He stood up. He took the plowshare, threw it into the forge. Da-hee pumped the bellows. The flame roared. The blacksmith worked. Ju-hyeon watched. The blacksmith's hands moved with confidence and precision. Every blow of the hammer landed exactly where it should. The metal glowed orange and white. Sparks flew. Da-hee didn't look away from the sparks. She was used to them. By evening, the knife was ready. Rough, unadorned, but sharp and sturdy. The blade was as long as his palm. The handle was wrapped in a strip of leather. A good working knife. In a year of famine, a knife like this is worth 3 sacks of barley, maybe more. Ju-hyeon took the knife and bowed to the blacksmith. He said the birch charcoal would be ready in 3 days. A promise. The blacksmith nodded. He was beginning to believe this boy's promises. The merchant arrived the next day around noon. Pilji, a small, gaunt old man with a huge basket on his back. His face was darkened by the wind and frost. His eyes were quick and calculating. He stopped by the well and looked around. The village looked like all the northern villages, half dead, quiet, snow-covered. But smoke was rising from the chimney of the Seo household, and from the Han household, and from the blacksmith's. 3 inhabited houses. That was more than in the previous 4 villages he had passed through. Ju-hyeon came out to meet him. The merchant looked at the boy, thin, young, but his gaze wasn't that of a boy. The merchant had seen thousands of faces. He knew how to read people, just as Ju-hyeon knew how to read the soil. This boy wasn't a beggar, not a customer, something else. Ju-hyeon bowed. He invited the merchant into the house. He offered him some hot soup. The merchant didn't refuse. In the north, soup in winter is worth more than politeness. He stepped inside, sat down by the hearth, was served a bowl of nettle soup with acorn porridge. He ate in silence. Then he looked up and asked where the greens came from in winter. Ju-hyeon pointed to the greenhouse. The merchant went out into the yard. He looked. He touched the paper. He peered inside. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sparkled, the eyes of a man who had spotted an opportunity to make money. He asked how much it cost. Ju-hyeon smiled. It's not the greenhouse that's valuable, it's the knowledge. But he doesn't trade in knowledge. He trades in knives. He took out a blacksmith's knife. He placed it in front of the merchant. The blade glinted in the winter light. The merchant picked up the knife. He tested the blade with his fingernail. He tested its balance. He weighed it in his hand. A good knife. A very good one. Reforged from old iron, but the workmanship is masterful. He asked what the boy wanted. Ju-hyeon said, "Seeds. Any kind. Turnip, radish, barley, peas, anything that can be sown." The merchant opened his box. Inside were little bags, bundles, cloth, and salt. And at the very bottom, 3 small bags. Turnip seeds, barley seeds, and bean seeds. He'd picked them up out of habit back in Gyeongsang. In the south, seeds cost next to nothing. In the north, in winter, they're worth a life. Usually, he sold them for silver. A knife for 3 little bags of seeds. The merchant did the math in his head. A knife is worth more, so the boy is overpaying. Or the boy knows something the merchant doesn't. Pil-gi had spent 60 years on the roads of Joseon. He knew when he was being cheated. He wasn't being cheated. The boy simply wanted the seeds more than he wanted the profit. The merchant accepted the knife. He handed over all 3 pouches. Then he did something Ju-hyeon didn't expect. He reached into the box again and pulled out another pouch. A small one, tiny. He poured it into his palm. Tiny, dark seeds. He said he didn't know what they were. He'd bought them from a strange man at the market in Hamhyun. The man had said they were a vegetable from the south, one of those brought in by sea. The merchant had tried planting them at home. They didn't grow. He figured he'd been cheated, but it seemed a shame to throw them away. Ju-hyeon took the seeds. He looked at them. He rolled them around in his palm. Small, round, dark brown with a reddish tint. Smooth. He froze. The world around him stopped for a second. He knew these seeds. He knew them by touch, by sight, by smell. Brassica rapa, turnip. No, not an ordinary turnip. The shape of the seed was different, slightly larger. The color was darker, closer to Brassica rapa subspecies neranosa, tazoi, Beijing leaf turnip, or something related. A southern variety, brought from the coast, probably via Japan or Liaodong. It didn't take root at the merchant's because he planted it wrong, too deep or too early, or in unsuitable soil. This variety prefers cool weather, short days, moist soil, ideal conditions for North Korea in early spring. It will grow in a greenhouse in 30 days. In a garden bed, it takes 40. Leafy greens, vitamins, minerals, rapid growth. Ju-hyeon looked at the merchant. The merchant was waiting for the boy to return the trash. Ju-hyeon bowed deeply. He said he was grateful for the gift. The merchant snorted. A gift. Trash, not a gift. But the boy's politeness flattered him. He gathered up the box, stood up, finished his soup. And before leaving, he said one thing. He said that 4 villages from here to the southeast, in the village of Hwari, there lived an old woman named Beck. Behind old woman Beck's house grew a tree that no one has ever seen. She brought it from the coast 20 years ago. It's a strange tree. The fruits are small and sour, but the old woman swears that something useful can be made from them. The merchant didn't know exactly what, but he thought the boy with the greenhouse might be interested. Ju-hyeon asked what kind of tree it was. The merchant described it. It's succulent. The leaves are long. The fruits are yellow in the fall. Sour. Seeds inside. Persimmon. No, not a persimmon. The leaves are long, not wide. The fruits are small. Hawthorn, maybe. Or sea buckthorn. Sea buckthorn. Hippophae rhamnoides. If it's sea buckthorn, that's amazing. It has 10 times more vitamin C than a lemon. The oil from the seeds heals burns and wounds. You can dry the berries. You can make juice. You can freeze them. The tree survives in the poorest soils. It fixes nitrogen through symbiosis with bacteria. It improves the soil around it. It lives for 100 years. A single sea buckthorn tree is worth 10 fields of buckwheat if you know what to do with it. He remembered. The village of Hwari, 4 villages to the southeast. Old woman Peck, the tree. That's the next step, but not now. Right now, it's the seeds. The merchant had left. His figure dissolved into the snowy haze beyond the village. Ju-hyeon stood in the courtyard, holding 4 small bags of seeds: turnips, barley, beans, and an unknown bag that might be tso, or maybe not. Minseo stood nearby. She was counting. She was always counting. 4 kinds of seeds, plus the chumisa from Old Man Peck, plus the buckwheat from the Cho household. 6 crops, 6 chances. He went into the house. He laid out the seeds on the small table. His mother approached. Father came over. Widow Nam stood behind them. Everyone was watching. Handfuls of seeds on the wooden table. Small, unremarkable. But there was life in every handful. Entire fields, entire harvests. If everything was done right, if spring came on time, if there were no frosts, if. Ju-hyeon wasn't thinking about if. He was thinking about when to sow the turnips, when the barley, when the beans, in what kind of soil, how deep, at what intervals. He began to speak, not for the family, for Minseo. She sat next to him and listened. We'll plant the turnips first, in the greenhouse, in a week. They aren't afraid of the cold. They'll sprout in 5 days. The first harvest will be in a month. We'll plant the barley in the field as soon as the snow melts. It's a winter crop. The barley will go under the last snow and wake up with the first warmth. It's risky, but barley is hardy. It'll survive. We'll plant the beans later, when the soil warms up. Beans love warmth, but not heat. April, early May. We sow buckwheat last, at the end of May. It's fast growing. It'll yield a harvest in 2 months. We plant chumisa next to the buckwheat. They don't get in each other's way. Minseo listened. Her lips moved silently. She repeated it. She memorized it. Turnips first, barley second, beans third, buckwheat and chumisa are last. A simple sequence, but it contained the whole of spring, the whole of the coming year, all their hope. Her father was listening too. He stood by the wall, arms crossed, his face impassive, but he was listening to every word. When Ju-hyeon finished, her father asked, "Who will plow?" It was a heavy question. A plow requires an ox. There is no ox. There is a plow, but it's broken. Without a plowshare, because the plowshare had become a knife. But even if they fixed the plow, who would pull it? A person can't plow like an ox. Or maybe they can. Ju-hyeon answered. They would plow it themselves, by hand, with a hoe. Isn't that 1.5? That's impossible. Half. No. A third. A third? That's about 15 sotkas. 4 of us, if you count Han-il, whom Han might send in exchange for a share of the harvest. 4 of us in a week. It's hard. Very hard. But possible. A hoe is better than a plow for worn-out soil. A plow cuts deep and turns over the dead subsoil layer. A hoe works the top 10 centimeters, where life is, where the roots are, where the worms are, where the bacteria are. Father was silent. Then he nodded, once, slowly. It wasn't a nod of agreement. It was a nod of decision. Father had decided not to believe it. He had decided to plow. The difference is subtle but important. Faith is a luxury. Work is a necessity. Byung-woo understood work. He lost his faith when he buried his eldest son, but he could work. He always could. That night, Ju-hyeon went out into the yard. The sky was clear. The stars shone cold and sharp. The moon illuminated the snow with a blue light. He stood there, breathing. The frosty air stung his lungs. 2 months. He had lived in this body for 2 months. The family was alive. 7 people, all alive. The greenhouse was working. The hen was laying eggs. There were seeds. Kuz is on his side. Khan is on his side. The widow has come back to life. His father has started to stir. Minseo knows almost everything he knows. That's good. That's very good. But it's not enough. Spring will reveal the true value of everything. Harvest or famine. Life or death. The third move. His thoughts returned to the merchant, to the little bag of unknown seeds, to the sea buckthorn in the village of Hwari, to the old woman Peck. 4 villages to the southeast. A 2-day journey, maybe 3 with his legs. But he had to go. Sea buckthorn isn't just a tree, it's a strategy, a long-term one, for 5 years, for 10. Ju-hyeon left the house before dawn. His mother stood in the doorway and silently handed him a small bundle. Inside was a flatbread made from acorn flour and a bunch of dried wild garlic, food for 3 days. She didn't ask where he was going. Minseo had already explained it the night before. His mother just looked at him with that gaze that says, "Come back alive." He nodded. He hugged her. The boys remembered this gesture. His mother froze for a second. Then she let him go. Minseo came out after him. She handed him a stick, a sturdy one, sanded smooth, with a rag-wrapped handle. She had carved it yesterday from a hazel tree. She didn't say why, but on the road, a stick is a walking stick, a weapon, and a probe for the snow. Ju-hyeon took the stick and set off. The road to the southeast led through the forest. There was no trail. There was snow, deep, up to his knees, wet and heavy. Every step took effort. His body protested from the very first hour. His feet sank into the snow. His breathing became labored. Sweat broke out on his back and froze instantly. He walked and counted. 4 villages, about 20 li if he went in a straight line. But there was no straight path. There were mountains, ravines, frozen streams. The actual distance was closer to 30 li. He'd cover 10 in a day if he was lucky. He came upon the first village after 4 hours. 3 houses, all empty. The doors were torn off. The roofs had caved in. Snow lay on the floors inside the houses like a white blanket. No one. The families had either gone south or died. He didn't linger, but he peeked into a barn, empty. Even the rats were gone. Just as Old Man Pak had said. The second village, 5 houses, 2 inhabited. Smoke was rising from the chimney of one, thin and pale. Smoke from poor firewood, made from damp bark or straw. He approached. He knocked. An old man opened the door. His face was yellow. The skin on his skull was like parchment. His eyes were cloudy. Behind him, in the darkness, lay an old woman. She wasn't moving. Maybe she was asleep, maybe not. Ju-hyeon bowed. He asked for directions to Hwari. The old man pointed, over the pass, then down the stream, then straight to the fork in the trail, the right path. The old man's voice was like the rustling of dry leaves. Ju-hyeon took a piece of flatbread out of his bundle, half of what he had for the day, and placed it in front of the old man. The old man looked at the flatbread, then at the boy. He took it. His hands were shaking. He broke the flatbread in half and took 1/2 to the old woman. She didn't move. The old man placed the piece next to her head and returned to the doorway. He said quietly that the boy was kind but foolish, that sharing in a year of famine was a quick way to the grave. Ju-hyeon replied that he knew. He walked on. By evening, he reached the mountain pass. The wind whipped his face, icy and vicious. Visibility dropped. Snow blew horizontally. He found shelter under a rocky overhang. The rocks offered no warmth but shielded him from the wind. He sat down. He ate what was left of his daily ration, a quarter of a flatbread and 3 wild garlic stalks. His stomach growled. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But he had water. You can eat snow if you let it melt in your mouth. Cold water takes away calories but provides moisture. A compromise. He didn't sleep. He dozed off while sitting. He'd wake up from the cold, then doze off again. The night dragged on endlessly. His teeth chattered so loudly it seemed the whole mountain pass could hear him. He pulled his knees up to his chest and wrapped his arms around them. He curled up like an embryo, body heat, the only warmth. By morning, the wind had died down. He stood up. His legs wouldn't obey him. He had to stand there for a minute before they began to bend. He started down the slope. He found the stream quickly. The sound of the water guided him like a compass. It was easier to walk along the stream. The bank was firm. The snow wasn't as deep. By noon, he reached a fork in the trail, the right path, just as the old man had said. Another hour. The village of Kavari came into view around the bend like a painting. 4 houses in a hollow between 2 hills, sheltered from the wind. A south-facing slope, less snow than in Sonnim. The houses were sturdier. The fences were intact. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. A living village, not prosperous, but alive. He walked in. A dog barked, skinny, vicious, on a chain. A middle-aged woman came out of the nearest house. She looked at the stranger. Ju-hyeon bowed. He asked about the old woman, Baek. The woman pointed to the house at the far end, at the foot of the hill. The house stood apart from the others, small, but well kept. The fence was straight. The yard was clean. Dark bushes jutted out from the bare, branches, no leaves. But the branches were unusual, silvery, with tiny thorns. He stepped closer. He looked. His heart began to beat faster. Sea buckthorn. It was sea buckthorn, without a doubt. Hippophyllae rhamnoides. Silvery bark. Characteristic thorns. Slightly curved branches. There wasn't just one tree. 3 bushes. Maybe 4. Old. Gnarled. At least 20 years old. Just as the merchant had said. The door of the house opened. An old woman stood in the doorway. Small. Thin. Back straight. Eyes clear and sharp as a hawk's. She was about 70. Maybe older. But she stood firm. No cane. No support. She looked at the boy by her bushes and said that if he'd come to steal branches, he should know that she shoots a bow better than her late husband did. Ju-hyeon bowed, deeply. He said he wasn't there to steal, to ask. The old woman snorted. To ask. Everyone asks. No one knows what they're asking for. She led him into the house. The house was warm. The ondol was well heated. Clay pots stood on a shelf against the wall, many of them. Neat rows, labeled. He looked closely. Hanja characters, dried berries, oil, leaves, bark. Old woman Baek wasn't just an old woman with a tree. She was a keeper. She sat down across from him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked who had sent him. Ju-hyeon told her about the merchant, Ohm. The old woman nodded. Ohm. An old fox. He goes from village to village gathering gossip the way others gather furs. She asked why he needed the tree. Ju-hyeon told her the truth, that he had a village in the north, that the people were starving, that he needed a tree that provided food and medicine and didn't require good soil, that sea buckthorn was such a tree. The old woman froze. She repeated the word, sea buckthorn. She didn't know that name. She called the tree by another name, Morena Mujjeon, sea tree, because she'd brought the sapling from the coast 20 years ago. A sailor had sold it to her for a pot of salted fish. He'd said the tree had been brought from the land of the Mongols, that it grows on sand and rocks, that the berries cure coughs and wounds. She planted it. It grew. The berries were sour and small. The neighbors laughed. A useless tree. Sour stuff. But the old woman noticed something. The chickens that pecked at the fallen berries laid eggs longer than the others. The goats that chewed the leaves got sick less often. A cut on her grandson's hand healed in 3 days when she applied crushed berries to it. She began to gather them, drying them, pressing them for oil. 20 years, through trial and error, without books, without teachers, just observation and patience. Ju-hyeon listened and felt a respect welling up from within, like warmth from an ondol. This old woman was a scientist, not by degree, but in essence, an empiricist, a practitioner. 20 years of field observations without a single written record, everything in her head. He asked if he could take some cuttings, a few branches to plant. The old woman looked at him in silence, for a minute. 2. Then she asked what he would give in return. Ju-hyeon thought, what did he have? A flatbread, 1.5. Wild garlic, knowledge. He offered his knowledge. The old woman raised an eyebrow. He began to tell her about sea buckthorn, everything he knew, that there are male and female trees, that both are needed for fruit, that the roots fix nitrogen, that oil from the seeds and oil from the pulp are different things, that the juice can be preserved by adding honey, that the berries should be picked after the first frost, when they come off the branch more easily, that you can make tea from the leaves, that if you plant a tree on a bare hillside, in 5 years the slope will stop eroding, because the roots will hold the soil in place. The old woman listened. Her eyes changed. First, disbelief, then surprise, then something like hunger, not physical, but mental. She had been alone with her tree for 20 years. No one understood, no one cared. And now a boy from the north was sitting in front of her, saying things she'd been testing for years. She'd figured out the difference between male and female trees on her own, after 10 years of observation. The same went for frost and berries. But she didn't know about nitrogen. She hadn't tried extracting oil from the seeds separately from the pulp. She hadn't thought of making tea from the leaves. She stood up, went into the back room, came back with a knife. A long one, a sharp one. She said, "Let's go." They went out to the bushes. The old woman showed her which branches to cut. Young ones, 1-year-old shoots, with buds, as thick as a finger, as long as an elbow. She cut them herself, with precise movements. The knife sliced through the wood as if through butter. 10 cuttings, 12, 15. She wrapped the cut ends in a wet rag, then in birch bark, tied them up, handed them to Ju-hyeon. He took them. His hands were trembling. Not from the cold, from realization. The future lay in his hands, not just that of his village, of the entire region. The old woman stood by her bushes and watched him. Then she said she had a request, just one. If the trees grew, he should send her the berries from the first harvest in 3 years, not to eat, for comparison. She wanted to know whether the berries of the northern tree would differ from those of her southern one. 20 years of observation, and still so many questions. Ju-hyeon bowed deeply. He promised. She nodded. Then she went into the house and returned with a small pot, a small one, tightly sealed with wax. Inside was sea buckthorn oil, thick, orange, with a tangy, vivid scent. She said it was for the journey, and that the boy would catch a cold at the pass if he didn't rub it on his chest and back. Ju-hyeon took the oil. He wanted to bow again, but the old woman waved her hand. Enough bowing. Go. It would snow by evening. He set off. The cuttings were on his back, wrapped in birch bark. The oil was in his pocket. He had a plan in his head. Where to plant them, how, at what distance. The southern slope of the hill beyond the village. There's less wind there, more sun, good drainage, rocks. Sea buckthorn loves rocks. The roots cling to them like fingers. The return trip was harder. The snow began to fall by evening, just as the old woman had predicted. Wet. Heavy. The trail was being buried right before his eyes. He walked by memory, by landmarks, the rock at the pass, the stream below, the broken pine tree at the fork in the trail. He spent the night in the same village he'd passed on the way there. The old man let him stay at his place. The old woman didn't move a muscle this time either, but she was breathing. He could see the rags on her chest rising and falling. The old man asked what the branches were that he was carrying on his back. Ju-hyeon explained briefly. Trees, to plant. They'll bear berries in 3 years. The old man looked at the branches, then at the boy. He said that in 3 years he'd be 6 feet under, and so would the old woman. But the boy might live to see it. Young people are resilient. Ju-hyeon didn't answer. He lay down against the wall. He rubbed sea buckthorn oil on his chest and back. His skin glowed. The warmth seeped inside. The oil was working. Antioxidants, fatty acids, carotenoids. They penetrate the skin. They improve blood circulation. Old woman Beck knew this without any chemistry. She just knew. On the 3rd day, toward evening, he went out to meet the Sonnies. His legs wouldn't hold him up. His knees were shaking. The cuttings on his back weighed like a mountain. He walked past Ha's yard, past the blacksmith's, past the well. Minseo was standing at the gate to his yard, waiting. How long had she been standing there? An hour? 2? Since morning. She saw him and ran. She ran up. She stopped. She didn't hug him. She just stood there and looked at him, making sure he was unharmed, that he was alive, that he had returned. He held out the bundle of cuttings to her. He said one word, sea buckthorn. Minseo took the bundle, gently, as if it were alive. They entered the yard. His mother ran out of the house. She grabbed him by the shoulders. She felt him, his face, his hands, his shoulders. Everything was there. He was alive. His father stood in the doorway. He was silent, but Ju-hyeon noticed. His father wasn't standing in the corner. He was standing in the doorway, welcoming him, in his own way, silently, but welcoming him. Spring arrived in the 3rd month. Not right away, slowly, like a person waking up after a long illness. First, the stream swelled and began to flow faster. Then the snow started to settle and turn black. Then came the patches of bare ground, black, wet earth, the first in 5 months. Ju-hyeon stood at the edge of the field and watched. 1.5 li of land registered in the name of So Byung-gu. Now it looked like a wasteland. Withered grass, rocks, patches of dirty snow, weeds from years past, flattened to the ground. Any farmer in this county would have looked at it and turned away. Dead land. But Ju-hyeon saw something else. He saw the soil, dark, heavy, clayey by the stream, lighter on the slope, rocks on the eastern side. That's bad for hunting, but good for drainage. Weeds, lots of weeds. That means organic matter. If he plowed the weeds into the soil, they'd become fertilizer, green matter, nitrogen, carbon, micronutrients. He dropped to his knees, took a handful of soil, squeezed it between his fingers, sniffed it. A slightly sour smell, high moisture content, loam, pH about 5.5, maybe 6, perfect for buckwheat. A little acidic for barley, but tolerable. Beans need liming. Ash. They have ash. He stood up, wiped his hands, looked at his father. Byung-ho stood nearby with a hoe slung over his shoulder, an old hoe. The wooden handle was cracked and wrapped in rope. The iron blade was dull and rusty, but it was a hoe. Han-il was standing nearby, Han's eldest son, tall, broad-shouldered. His face was grim. His father had sent him to work off his share of the harvest. Han-il was unhappy, working in someone else's field, for someone else's idea, under the command of a boy 3 years younger than him. It was humiliating, but his father had spoken, and Han-il had come. The 4th was Ju-hyeon. Da-hee wanted to come too, but Ju-hyeon told her she was needed more in the workshop. We need 2 more hoe blades, made of any kind of iron. Let the blacksmith forge them. Da-hee was offended. She left without a word. But by evening, the 2 blades were ready. Rough, heavy, but sharp. They started at dawn. Ju-hyeon marked out the field, a 1/3 for plowing. Leave the rest alone for now. He showed her how to work. Not too deep, 10 centimeters, just the top layer. Turn the weeds root side up. Break up the clods. Leave it for a day. Go over it again tomorrow. Level it out. Her father worked in silence, methodically. The hoe rose and fell evenly, like a pendulum. He knew the land. He knew the rhythm of the work. But he used to plow deep and in straight furrows. That's how his father had taught him, and his father's father before him. Now his son was telling him to work shallowly and in crisscross patterns, contrary to everything he knew. With Byung-ho, he remained silent and simply did as he was told. Trust, not with words, with a hoe. Han-il worked quickly, roughly. He hacked at the earth as if it were an enemy, deeper than necessary. Ju-hyeon approached. He showed him. Shorter, lighter. The earth is not an enemy, it's a partner. Han-il looked down at him. He was a head taller than Ju-hyeon, twice as broad-shouldered than Ju-hyeon's. A kid was teaching him how to plow, but Han-il looked at Ju-hyeon's furrow and then at his own. Ju-hyeon's furrow was smooth. The soil lay neatly. The weeds were turned over. The clods were broken up. Han-il's furrow was ragged. Chunks of turf jutted out at odd angles. The soil had been dug up too deep. The gray subsoil was visible. The topsoil had been turned over. Han-il was stronger, but Ju-hyeon was more precise. Han-il grumbled something, but he adjusted his grip. He began to make shallower cuts. By evening, they had plowed a strip 10 steps wide and 100 steps long. Very little, but it was a start. Ju-hyeon barely crawled back home. His body felt like a rag. Every muscle was drained. His hands couldn't even hold a spoon. His mother poured him some soup and fed him herself, just like when he was a child. He didn't resist. Minseo sat nearby and took notes. Yes, she was taking notes. While he was visiting the old woman Beck, something had happened. Cho Ha-eun had come to the village. She was the daughter of a bankrupt yangban from a neighboring county, 19 years old. She arrived alone, carrying a small bundle on her shoulder. She asked to be taken on as a laborer. Her mother accepted her because extra hands are never a bad thing. Ha-eun knew how to read and write. She was literate, the only literate woman in the village. And during the 3 days that Ju-hyeon was away, Minseo asked Ha-eun to teach her how to write. Ha-eun was surprised. A peasant girl wanted to learn to read and write, but she agreed. And now, Minseo sat there with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of birch bark, writing down Ju-hyeon's words in clumsy characters. What kind of land they plowed, how deep, what weeds they turned over, what color the soil was. Her first diary, her first entry, primitive, crooked, but a record nonetheless. Ju-hyeon saw this and froze. He looked at Minseo. He looked at Ha-eun, who was standing by the wall with her arms crossed, watching him with an expression of cold curiosity. Tall, thin, a delicate face with sharp cheekbones, intelligent, wary eyes. Her clothes were shabby but clean. Her posture was straight. She was used to keeping her back straight, a Yangban upbringing, even in poverty. Ju-hyeon bowed to her. He thanked her for teaching his sister. Ha-eun raised an eyebrow. She said his sister had asked for it herself, and that her sister was learning faster than any student she'd ever seen. Ju-hyeon wasn't surprised. Minseo was a trap for knowledge. Everything that got inside stayed there forever. Hyeon looked at the birch bark with the notes, then at Ju-hyeon. She asked why a peasant boy needed notes about the land. Her voice was even, without mockery, but with a challenge. Ju-hyeon replied, "Because memory fails, but notes don't. Because if he's gone, the notes will remain, and whoever else can carry on." Ha-eun was silent. Then she said that was the most sensible thing she'd ever heard from a peasant, and she immediately added that, incidentally, this was the first time a peasant had said anything to her other than, "Step aside, young lady." Her tone was sharp, but her eyes were smiling. The plowing went on for a week. By the 3rd day, Ju-hyeon's father had really gotten into it. He wasn't just working. He started giving Hwang orders, showing him where to strike, how to hold the hoe, where to pile the stones. He did it better than Ju-hyeon, because he'd known this land for 40 years. He knew every stone, every mound, every little hollow where water pools in the spring. Ju-hyeon gave him that space. He stepped back. He plowed alongside, but didn't give orders. His father took his place. Not completely, not entirely, but he'd started. By the end of the week, 1/3 of the field had been plowed. 5 sotak. A small field. Ridiculous by Iowa standards, where a single tractor can plow 200 acres in a day. But here, 4 men with hoes had turned over 5 sotak of rocky soil in a week, soil that hadn't been touched in 2 years. It was an accomplishment. It was time to sow. Ju-hyeon divided the field into 3 sections. The first for barley. Barley first. It isn't afraid of the cold. The soil is still frozen deep down, but the top layer has thawed. That's enough. Barley seeds are small and few in number, just a little more than a handful. He sowed them himself, by hand, placing each seed individually, a palm's width apart. He didn't scatter them. He didn't pour them out by the handful like all the farmers in this world do. Every single seed in its own place. Minseo walked beside him and counted. 312 barley seeds. 312 chances. If even half of them sprout, that's 150 plants. Each will produce an ear. Each ear will have 30 to 40 grains. 150 multiplied by 35. 5,250 grains. 5,000 from a single handful. Sow 5,000 next year and get 175,000. In 2 years, millions. Exponential growth. The magic of math. He explained this to Minseo. She listened with wide eyes. Then she took out a piece of birch bark and wrote down the numbers, crookedly, slowly, but she wrote them down. Ha-eun watched from a distance. She stood by the fence. Her arms were crossed. Her face was inscrutable. But that evening she approached Ju-hyeon and asked how he knew about numbers and how seeds grow. He replied that anyone can count. She shook her head. She said that many people know how to count, but only a few can count the future. He remained silent. Ha-eun added that she needed a job, a real one, not washing pots. Her father had been a yangban, a ruined one. He'd drunk away his land and his honor, but he'd taught his daughter to read, count, and keep records. She can do what no one else in this village can, and she wants to be useful, not out of gratitude, out of pride. Because a useful person isn't a freeloader. Ju-hyeon looked at her, then at Minseo, then back at Ha-eun. He said he needed a bookkeeper, someone who would record everything. Seeds, harvests, exchanges, debts, who owed what to whom, who worked how much, who received how much, transparency, fairness. Numbers don't lie. Ha-eun straightened up. Her back became even straighter, if that was possible. She said she could handle it. Ju-hyeon nodded. Then he added, and one more thing. Minseo is a quick learner, but she needs a teacher, a real one, not a brother who mumbles by the hearth in the evenings. If Ha-eun agrees to teach Minseo not only to write but also to count, then Ju-hyeon will consider it just as much work as plowing. Ha-eun looked at him, a long, lingering look. Then she said that the last time she'd heard of a man valuing literacy as much with plowing, it was her grandfather, and he was a drunkard and a poet, but at least he didn't lie. In the 4th month, the bird cherry blossomed, white clusters on bare branches. The scent was sweet and unsettling. The old-timers said that bird cherry blossoms heralded a cold snap, the last frost before the real warmth. Ju-hyeon knew they were right. Empirical signs work. Over 1,000 years of observation, people have learned what meteorologists learn from instruments. He covered the barley bed with straw, old, rotten straw, but enough to retain 2 degrees of heat in the soil. The barley had survived the last frost. The sprouts were pale and thin, but alive. 203 out of 312 had sprouted, a 65% germination rate, an excellent result for old seeds. Minseo wrote down the number. Ha-eun checked the entry and corrected the character. By this time, the Seo family's yard had changed beyond recognition. The greenhouse had expanded. A second one stood next to the first, a larger one. Da-hee built the frame in half a day. Her hands had grown more precise. She no longer snorted when Ju-hyeon explained what to do. She listened. She did as she was told. Sometimes she offered her own ideas, and her suggestions were good. She came up with the idea of placing the frame not on dug-in posts, but on a stone foundation. The stones heat up in the sun during the day. At night, they give off heat. The greenhouse maintains a more stable temperature. Ju-hyeon looked at her when she said that. He looked at her the way an agronomist looks at a colleague who's proposed an elegant solution. Da-hee noticed that look. She turned away, but her ears turned red. There were now 2 chickens. Han gave her the second one, not as a trade, for the result. His greenhouse produced greens, and for the first time in 3 years, Han ate fresh produce in the winter. He didn't thank her with words. He sent a chicken, with Hanel, in silence. 2 chickens were delivered, 1 every other day, eggs every day, sometimes 2, protein for 9 people. Yes, 9. Ha-eun became the 10th. No, the 9th. Ju-hyeon sometimes lost count. Mother, father, Minseo, Ji-eun, Ju-hyeon, Nam's widow, Isu, Bomi, Ha-eun. 9. 9 mouths to feed. 2 greenhouses, 2 chickens, a field of barley and beans, wild garlic from the forest, acorn flour, nettles, not full, but not hungry either, a fine line, a thin one, but on the right side. One evening in the 4th month, a woman approached Seo's house. She was young. Her clothes were dirty and torn. Her face was weather-beaten. Her hair was tangled. She was carrying something wrapped in rags on her back. The bundle didn't move. She stood at the gate and didn't come in. She just stood there. Mother saw her first. She went out. She looked. Then she looked at the bundle. Her face changed. She held out her arms. The woman handed over the bundle. A baby, tiny, blue, eyes closed, breathing barely audible. The mother pressed the baby to her chest and quickly went back into the house. The woman remained at the gate. Her legs buckled and she sat down in the snow. She didn't fall. She actually sat down, slowly, carefully, as if she were choosing a spot. Then she closed her eyes. Kim Yuna, 17 years old, a refugee from the north. She had been walking for 12 days, with her dead younger brother whom she had buried by the roadside on the 3rd day, with the baby she had found on the 5th day in an empty village. She didn't know whose baby it was. She couldn't find the parents. There was no one alive around. She took the child and kept walking. She fed him with snow and her own body heat. 12 days. Ju-hyeon returned from the fields and saw unfamiliar shoes in the yard. He entered the house. A woman was lying on the ondol, covered with whatever she could find. The mother was sitting by the hearth with the baby on her lap. The baby was undressed and pressed against her mother's chest, skin to skin. An old method, the kangaroo method. The mother was doing it instinctively, without knowing why, without any theory. She was simply holding the small, cold body against her own large, warm one and keeping it warm. Ju-hyeon approached. He looked at the baby, tiny, about 3 months old, maybe 4, emaciated, dehydrated, gray skin, blue lips, but he was breathing. Minseo stood nearby, waiting. He told her to warm up some goat's milk. He spoke quietly so as not to frighten the mother. They didn't have any goat's milk, but Han had goats. Minseo nodded and ran to Han. She returned 10 minutes later with a clay bowl of warm milk. Han gave it to her without asking any questions. His wife had milked the goat and warmed the milk over the hearth. Ju-hyeon took the milk. He added a drop of honey. The honey was from the little jug they'd been saving since winter. That very one, the last of it. He dipped his finger in the milk and brought it to the baby's lips. The baby didn't react. Ju-hyeon dripped some milk onto the baby's lips. He waited. He dripped some more. The little tongue twitched. The lips tightened around his finger. A reflex. A sucking reflex. Alive. The baby began to suck. Slowly, weakly, but he began. Ju-hyeon's mother watched this and moved her lips silently. She was praying. To whom? To Buddha, to a mountain spirit, just to the sky. What difference does it make? She was praying. Ju-hyeon fed the baby for an hour, drop by drop, his finger in the milk, a finger to the lips, again, patiently, methodically, like watering a sprout in a greenhouse, drop by drop. Don't overwater, don't let it dry out. By nightfall, the baby's cheeks had turned pink, not completely, but the bluish tint had faded from his lips. His breathing became more even, deeper. He fell asleep on Ju-hyeon's mother's chest. The mother didn't move. She sat like a statue, holding him, warming him. Yuna lay on the ondol and didn't wake up. Her body had shut down. 12 days on her feet without food or sleep had finally caught up with her. Ju-hyeon covered her with another layer of rags. He noticed her feet. Her left foot was swollen. Her toes were dark. Frostbite. Severe. Definitely 2nd degree. Maybe 3rd degree. It needed treatment. Warm water. Not hot. Warm. Slow warming. Then ointment. He had sea buckthorn oil. Just a little left. Sea buckthorn heals frostbite. Carotenoids, vitamin E, tissue regeneration. He did everything he could. He washed her foot. He rubbed oil on it, wrapped it in a clean cloth, not too tight. Blood circulation. The tissues need to breathe. Yuna didn't wake up even when he touched her injured leg. She had fallen so deeply into sleep, or into oblivion. The next morning, she opened her eyes. She lay there, staring at the ceiling. Then she turned her head. She saw a house, a hearth, people. Ju-hyeon's mother with a baby, Minseo with birch bark, Ji-eun, who was playing with Bomi in the corner, Widow Nam, who was cooking porridge. Yuna looked on, confused. Where was she? Who were these people? Why was it warm? Why did it smell like food? She tried to sit up. Her body wouldn't obey her. Her left leg shot with pain. She fell back down. Her mother came over. She placed a hand on Yuna's forehead. She checked her temperature. She shook her head. A fever. Not high, but there. Her body was fighting it. Yuna looked at the woman, then at the baby at her breast. Yuna's eyes widened. She asked hoarsely, "Alive?" Just one word. Her mother nodded. Yuna closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her dirty, weather-beaten face. Silently, just like Ju-hyeon's mother had on that first evening. Tears not of grief, of relief. Ju-hyeon returned from the fields around dinner time. He saw that Yuna had woken up. He sat down beside her. He didn't speak. He poured her some soup, set the bowl beside her, waited for her to drink it. She drank greedily. She held the bowl with both hands. Her hands were trembling. Soup dripped down her chin. Her mother wiped her face with a rag, just like a child. Yuna didn't pull away. She accepted it. 3 days later, she was able to sit up. By the 5th month, the Seo household was feeding 12 people, 10 of their own and 2 from the village. Old Man Park came every morning for a bowl of soup. His wife had died at the end of the 3rd month, quietly, in her sleep. The old man found her that morning. He sat beside her all day. Then he came to Seo's house and sat down by the gate. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat there. Seo's mother brought him a bowl. From then on, he came every morning. He sat by the gate. He received a bowl. He left, in silence. They sowed the buckwheat at the end of the 5th month. The soil had warmed up. Ju-hyeon had been waiting for exactly this moment, when the soil, at the depth of a palm, felt warm to the touch. Not hot, warm, like the body of a healthy person. He scattered the buckwheat seeds over the prepared plot, each seed in its own hole. He sowed the chumizu nearby, in 2 rows, 2 cubits between the rows, wide, wasteful by local standards. Everyone sowed densely. More seeds meant a bigger harvest. The logic of a hungry person. Flawed logic. Dense sowing means competition. The plants fight for light, water, and nutrients. They all grow weaker. They all yield less. Sparse planting means space. Every plant gets everything it needs. Every ear is full. Every grain is large. Han-il looked at the distance between the rows and said that Ju-hyeon was planting like a drunk. Ju-hyeon's father looked at Han-il. He said nothing, but Han-il fell silent. So Byung-gu's authority in the field was unquestionable. Not because he was right, but because he was the oldest man in the field. Hierarchy. Ju-hyeon used it without disrupting it. He let his father be in charge in the field. He himself remained an advisor. Quiet, unobtrusive, one who whispers rather than shouts. By this time, life on the farm had settled into a rhythm. Morning, rising at dawn, checking the greenhouses, watering, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs. Breakfast, porridge made from acorn flour or millet, if available. Greens from the greenhouse. 1 egg for the 4 of them. Then work. The men in the fields, the women in the courtyard. Minseo in the greenhouse. Ha-eun keeping records and tending to the children. Yuna in the forest gathering firewood and wild garlic. Mother by the hearth. Nam, the widow, does the laundry and cleans. Evening, dinner, soup, porridge, greens, conversations, then sleep, and morning again. Rhythm, order, life. Not mere survival, life. The difference is subtle but important. Survival is when you think about tomorrow. Life is when you think about the day after tomorrow. The Seo household began to think about the day after tomorrow. One evening in the 5th month, Ju-hyeon sat by the hearth and drew a plan for a smokehouse on birch bark. The smokehouse is needed by fall, when there will be meat, game. Wild boars come down from the mountains at the end of summer. Deer come out to drink. Pheasants fatten up on berries. The meat needs to be preserved. Salted meat. Smoking. Cold smoke. 3 days at a temperature no higher than 30 degrees. The meat keeps for months. A year, if done right. Da-hee sat across from him and looked at the drawing. She came by every evening. At first, to help with the greenhouses. Then, to see what else this strange boy had come up with. She looked at the plan for the smokehouse and frowned. Then she said the chimney was too narrow. The draft would be poor. The smoke would flow back into the chamber. It needed to be wider and lower, and with a bend, so the smoke would cool down on its way from the firebox to the smoking chamber. Ju-hyeon looked at her. She was right. Absolutely right. The blacksmith's daughter knew draft and smoke like the back of her hand. She'd grown up by the forge. Smoke was her element. He corrected the drawing. He widened the flue. He added a bend. He showed it to her. She nodded. Then she added that if he made the chamber with double walls and an air gap, the temperature would be more even. Thermal insulation. She didn't know that word, but she knew the principle. Just as old woman Peck knew about sea buckthorn without any botany. Empirical knowledge. Priceless. Ju-hyeon finished drawing the double wall, the perfect smokehouse. Designed by a 21st century agronomist and the daughter of a 17th century blacksmith. Da-hee looked at the final drawing, then at Ju-hyeon. There was something new in her eyes. Not mockery, not a challenge. Respect. Quiet. Reluctant, but genuine. She stood up and left without a word. She turned around at the threshold. She said she'd start tomorrow. The stones for the foundation were across the river. She knew where. It took 3 weeks to build the smokehouse. Da-hee and Ju-hyeon, just the two of them. They hauled the stones together. They mixed the clay together. They laid the walls together. Da-hee was stronger. Ju-hyeon was more precise. Together, they worked as one. She handed him the stones. He set them in place. She held them steady. He secured them. Without a word, just by a glance, with a gesture. The smokehouse turned out small, 1 meter by 1 meter. A chamber with 5 hooks. A chimney with a bend, double-walled. The firebox was separate, just a couple of steps away. Between the firebox and the smoking chamber ran an underground channel lined with stone. The smoke traveled through the channel. It cooled down. It entered the chamber cold, 25 degrees. Perfect. Da-hee lit the first fire in the firebox. The smoke began to rise. Slowly, lethargically. It crept through the channel, entered the chamber. A thin wisp drifted out of the opening at the top. The draft was working. Da-hee smiled. For the first time in all the time he'd known her, a wide, open smile, almost childlike. Then she caught herself. She crossed her arms. She frowned. She grumbled that she'd go. She left. But the smile remained in Ju-hyeon's memory, like the first sprout in a greenhouse. Small, unexpected, alive. Ju-hyeon began setting snares. Not for wild boars. It was too early for that. For small game. Hares, pheasants, badgers. He knew how. 15 years of field zoology. Thousands of snares in the forests of Iowa. The game was different here, but the principles were the same. An animal trail. A narrow spot. A snare made of hair rope at the height of the animal's head. An anchor tied to a tree. Simple and reliable. He taught Hanil. The kid turned out to be capable. Heavy and rough, but with good hands and a keen eye. He spotted the trails, read the tracks. Not as well as Ju-hyeon, but he learned quickly. In the first week, they caught 3 hares and 1 badger. They skinned the hares and hung them in the smokehouse. They rendered the badger fat. Badger fat is gold, medicine, an ointment for colds and coughs, leather conditioner, a base for candles, fuel for oil lamps. Yuna turned out to be the best forester of them all. She went into the forest every day. She came back with firewood and something else. Mushrooms, the first ones of spring. Small ones, but edible. She knew which ones to pick. A refugee's memory. 12 days on the road had taught her to see food where others saw only the forest. Wild garlic, fern shoots, young linden leaves. Everything came in handy. Yuna didn't talk. She worked. She came, she left, in silence. But every evening she would sit by the hearth next to Ju-hyeon's mother and help feed the baby. The baby was growing, slowly, but growing. Yuna held him in her arms carefully, as if he were something fragile and priceless. His mother gave the child a name, Sonho, Pine Boy, because he had been found in the village near a pine forest. Yuna didn't object. It was a beautiful name. Warm, just like this house. Ju-hyeon planted the sea buckthorn on the southern slope of the hill. 15 cuttings. He dug holes. He filled them with a mixture of soil and ash. He watered them. He stuck the cuttings in, at an angle, at a 45-degree angle. That way, the survival rate is higher. He wrapped the tops in a wet rag. He shielded them from the wind with stones. I checked on them every morning. I watered them. After 3 weeks, buds had swollen on 7 of the 15 cuttings. 7 out of 15, 47%. That's normal for cuttings without growth stimulants. A month later, leaves appeared on 5 of them, small, silvery, narrow, like sea buckthorn leaves. 5 trees, the first berries in 3 years, a full harvest in 5. He stood on the hillside and looked at the 5 little twigs with their silvery leaves. 5 trees. In his mind's eye, he saw 20 trees, 50, 100, orange berries in clusters on thorny branches, oil, juice, medicine, vitamins, a windbreak, nitrogen for the soil, life. He smiled, quietly, to himself. Then he went downstairs. Work was waiting. Toward the end of the 5th month, a woman arrived in the village of Sonnim who changed everything. Pak Son-hwa, 22 years old, a wandering herbalist, a disciple of a Buddhist monk healer. She didn't come by chance. She had heard about the village in the north where greenery grows in winter, where chickens lay eggs in the frost, where a boy heals the earth. Rumors travel fast, even along the dead roads of a famine year. Son-hwa came to check it out. She appeared on the trail in the morning, not very tall, with a light step, a basket on her back, herbs in the basket. She smelled of herbs, mint and wormwood and something else, something bitter and green. She walked into Seo's yard as if she were coming home. She looked at the greenhouse, peered inside, touched the leaves, sniffed them, stood up straight. She looked at Ju-hyeon, who was standing by the fence with a hoe. She said the greenhouse was nice, but some mint wouldn't hurt. It keeps aphids away, and it adds flavor to the soup. Ju-hyeon froze. She knew about mint and aphids, from experience, just as old woman Beck knew about sea buckthorn, just as the old women in the village knew their folk remedies. He asked who she was. She replied briefly, a herbalist, looking for a boy who heals the earth. She wants to see how he does it. He said that the earth doesn't get sick, it just gets tired. Son-hwa smiled. She said that people don't get sick either, they just get tired too. And the cure is the same, proper food, rest, and patience. She stayed. No one invited her, she just stayed. She set her box down in the corner. She untied it and laid out the herbs. The mother looked at her and didn't chase her away. A herbalist in the house is protection, against illness, against the evil eye, against fear. Son-hwa examined everyone, silently, professionally. She checked their eyes, gums, nails, and pulse, everyone. Then she approached Ju-hyeon and said that the widow Nam had rotten teeth, and that Minseo needed more fat in her diet because her hair was dull, and that the baby Son-ho was healthier than she looked, and would start crawling in a month, and that Ju-hyeon's own heart was beating too fast for his age, and that he needed to sleep more. Ju-hyeon looked at her. She had just conducted a medical examination of 10 people in 20 minutes, without instruments, without tests, just by looking at their eyes, gums, nails, and pulse. And she was right about everything. He knew that. He had seen Minseo's dull hair. He knew about the widow's teeth. He could feel his own heart pounding after every workday. She saw the same things he did, but she saw them in people. He saw them in the earth. 2 perspectives, 1 principle. A shortage is a shortage. A living body is a living body. It doesn't matter if it's a plant or a person. He told her she was right. She replied that she knew, without smugness. As a matter of fact, that evening they sat by the hearth and talked. It was the first real conversation between equals in all the time Ju-hyeon had been here. She told him about her teacher, a monk from a mountain monastery. He'd been healing people for 30 years. He knew every herb, every root, every illness. He died of a fever 2 years ago. Son-hwa was there. She couldn't save him. She didn't recognize the symptoms. Typhus, probably typhus. She didn't know that word, but she described the symptoms: fever, a rash, delirium, death on the 7th day. Typhus. She hadn't treated anyone since then. She gathered herbs, she sold them. She went from village to village, but she didn't treat anyone. She was afraid. Ju-hyeon listened. Then he said he understood, that he too was afraid, every day, that the seeds wouldn't sprout, that the frost would return, that there wouldn't be enough food. But fear isn't a reason to stop. Fear is a signal. It tells you that the matter is important. People aren't afraid of unimportant things. Sonhwa looked at him, quietly, for a long time. Then she said that for a 17-year-old boy, he was saying things that were too wise. Ju-hyeon replied that he could be silly sometimes too. He just tried harder around her. Sonhwa laughed. The first laughter in this house that wasn't connected to children or food. Adult laughter. Warm. Minseo looked at Sonhwa, then at her brother, then back at Sonhwa, and wrote a single word on the birch bark. Herbalist. The summer was short and hot. The rains came in the 6th month. 3 days of downpours. The stream burst its banks. Water flooded the lower edge of the field. Ju-hyeon watched this and didn't panic. He knew. He had deliberately sown barley on the upper section, where the drainage was better, where the water flows away rather than pooling. The lower edge was under floodwater. Let it flood. The water would bring silt. Silt is fertilizer. Free. The best there is. The Nile Delta had fed Egypt for thousands of years in the same way. Flooding, silt, harvest. The barley stood like a green wall. 203 plants, each knee-high. The ears of grain were beginning to fill out. Heavy, full, beautiful. Father went out to the field every morning. He stood at the edge and looked, silently. Then he'd come back. He didn't say anything, but Ju-hyeon could see. Father was changing. His back was straightening. His step grew firmer. When he spoke, his voice sounded different. Not muffled, but clearer, like an instrument that had just been tuned. The beans were blooming, white flowers on green stems. Bees were flying in. Where did the bees come from in this barren land? From the forest. Wild hives in old tree hollows. The bees had found the bean flowers and flown in. Ju-hyeon watched the bees and thought, honey, an apiary. Next year, another project, another venture. But not now. Right now, the harvest is the priority. The buckwheat had sprouted and was growing quickly, just as promised. In 60 days, it would cover the field with pink and white flowers. The chumiza nearby was stretching upward. Slender stems, fluffy panicles, beautiful. Ha-eun kept daily records, crooked hieroglyphs on birch bark, date, weather, what was done, what was observed, number of eggs, number of game caught, ash consumption, manure consumption. The first ledger of the village of Sonnim. She did this with fierce precision. Every figure was verified. Every entry was clear. The pride of a Yangban's daughter was poured into every stroke. Ju-hyeon saw this and appreciated it. He told her once that her records were worth more than all the grain in the field. Ha-eun looked at him. She narrowed her eyes. She said that if he was trying to flatter her, he was doing it very strangely. Who compares a woman to an account book? He replied that he wasn't comparing them, that the book was a tool, and she was the master, and that the master is always more valuable than the tool. Ha-eun was silent. Then she turned away, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. In the middle of summer, news arrived. Bad news. Han Dik-su came to Ju-hyeon in the morning, with a face as gray as the winter sky. He said that a man had come to see him yesterday, from the county administration, a tax collector. No, not a collector, an assistant to the assistant, a low-level official. He came to count the households, to take a census of the living and the dead. Routine business before the fall tax collection. But this man asked strange questions. He asked about the greenhouses, about chicken coops, about the boy who was sowing seeds in a new way. He asked a lot of questions. He took notes. Then he left. Khan didn't know what he had written down, but he knew that when an official takes notes, it's a bad sign. Ju-hyeon listened. His face was calm. Inside, he was cold. He had been expecting this. He knew that sooner or later, rumors would reach the local government. A village that doesn't go hungry while everyone around it is dying. Greenhouses in winter, eggs all year round. This couldn't go unnoticed. In a world where peasants die in silence, a well-fed village is an anomaly. And anomalies attract those who feed off the hunger of others. Hwang Cheol-su, the magistrate's assistant. Ju-hyeon didn't know him personally, but he knew the type. 15 years living in Iowa among farmers had taught him to understand not only the land, but also the people who want to take what grows on it. Tax collectors, middlemen, bankers, they're all cut from the same cloth, whether in the 21st century or the 17th. They don't create, they redistribute to their own advantage. He asked Han what he knew about Hwan. Han told him. Hwang Cheol-su, about 45 years old, smart, tough, came to the county 5 years ago, rose quickly through the ranks. He became the magistrate's right-hand man. He keeps the tax records, double bookkeeping. Everyone knows it. No one can prove it. He lists the dead as alive, the living as dead. The tax grain goes to middlemen in Liaodong. The difference goes into his pocket. A common scheme, as old as the hills. But Hwan added his own twist. He doesn't just steal, he controls. Villages that pay on time and don't complain are left in peace. Villages that draw attention are hit with extra levies, voluntary donations, for road repairs, for maintaining the garrison, for the administration's needs. You can't refuse. Refusal is rebellion. Rebellion is execution, simple and effective. Ju-hyeon listened. He thought. The village of Sonnim was drawing attention, not on purpose, but it was. Greenhouses, chickens, fresh greens in winter, rumors. Merchant Ohm must have spread the word, not out of malice, out of habit. Merchants gossip. It's in their nature. Hwan heard about it. He sent out scouts. Now he knows, and he'll be coming soon, not alone. First, he'll send a demand, an additional levy. He'll gauge their reaction. If they pay without a word, it means they have the means to pay. That means he can ask for more and more, until he's squeezed everything out of them. If they refuse, then other methods. Bandits from the mountains, a denunciation to the capital. Everything in the arsenal of a petty tyrant with a seal. Ju-hyeon sat in the courtyard and thought. Ha-eun sat next to the birch bark. Minseo was across from her. Son-hwa was sorting through herbs by the wall. Yuna was sharpening an axe. Da-hee was poking at the ground with a stick. Everyone was silent. Everyone was waiting for him to speak. He said they would prepare, not for battle, for a siege. Not walls and moats, supplies, communications, reputation. They needed not only their enemies but also their friends to know about the village. They needed to ensure that Hwan couldn't crush them quietly and unnoticed. To do this, Sonnim had to become known, by name and by deeds, so that destroying the village would cost more than preserving it. Ha-eun raised her head. She said that to achieve this, they needed people in the village council, or higher up, someone who could stand between the village and Hwan, a shield, a living shield. Ju-hyeon nodded. She thought the same way he did. But where could they find such a person? Ha-eun said there was an option, the magistrate himself. If he could see the village with his own eyes, if we could bring him here and show him that Sonnim isn't a rebellion or a cult, but simply a place where people have learned not to die. The magistrate isn't stupid. He knows that Hwan's denunciations are a tool of control, but he needs a reason to intervene. A reason, not a complaint from below. That's dangerous. But information from above, or from the side, or... She fell silent. Then she said she knew a man. Not personally, from her father's stories. There are families in Seoul who take an interest in what's happening in the provinces. Not out of kindness, out of self-interest. Information from the provinces is currency at court. If word reaches Seoul that someone in the north has found a way to stop the famine, a real solution, not just a decree on paper, it will attract attention. Not from the officials, from those behind the officials, those who pull the strings. Ju-hyeon listened. Ha-eun was thinking on a grander scale than he'd expected. She didn't think in terms of the court and the village. She thought in terms of the county and the capital. Yangban blood, Yangban thinking. Not land, but power. Not a hoe, but a seal. He said it was a good idea, but a long one. Months. Seoul is far away. Word won't reach there anytime soon, and Hwan might come tomorrow. So, at the same time, we need protection here and now. Hanil, snares, pikes. Not for wild boars, for people, just in case. Hanil sat by the fence, whittling a stick. He looked up. He looked around. He nodded, without words. It was easier for him that way, clearer. Not politics or rumors. A pike in his hand, an enemy at the gate, a clear task. He went to his father to ask for permission. Han wasn't pleased, but he didn't refuse. At the same time, Ju-hyeon began building a secret cellar under the smokehouse. The idea was simple, a pit 2 by 2 meters, as deep as a man is tall. The walls were lined with stone. The floor was packed down and covered with sand. On top was a lid made of planks covered with earth. The entrance was through the smokehouse, inconspicuous. You had to know where to look to find it. An ice cellar. In winter, it would be filled with ice from the stream. The ice would last until the end of summer. Inside, it was cold all year round. Meat, fish, grain, everything that needed to be hidden from the tax collector's eyes. An invisible granary. Da-hee dug. Yuna hauled stones. Kine calculated the volume. Minseo watched the entrance. Mother prepared food for the workers. The widow Na washed the work clothes. Everyone did their part. A small machine, well-coordinated, efficient, built by people who, 6 months ago, were dead. Within a week, the cellar was ready. Ju-hyeon went inside. Cool, dry. The stone retains the temperature. The sand absorbs moisture. Perfect. In the fall, there will be grain here. Smoked meat, salted meat, dried fish, everything Hwan won't see or count, everything that will allow the village to survive the winter, even if the tax collector takes the entire harvest. He went back upstairs. Da-hee was standing at the entrance. She was wiping her hands. Her face was covered in dirt. Her hair was disheveled. She looked at him and said the cellar was good, but it needed a lock. She'd forge one, small, inconspicuous, but sturdy. Ju-hyeon nodded. Then he spoke quietly. He said that every item she made should bear her mark, not his, hers. A small symbol, Yoon. It's her work, her hands, her craftsmanship. Da-hee froze. She stared at him. For a second, 2, 3. Then she turned abruptly and walked away, with quick steps, without looking back. But Ju-hyeon saw it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, quickly, angrily, as if she were angry at herself for it. Fall came early. In the 8th month, the leaves on the oak trees turned yellow and began to fall. The air grew crisp and cold. In the morning, the grass glistened silver with frost. Ju-hyeon stood at the edge of the field and looked at the barley. The ears were heavy, golden, bent toward the ground under the weight of the grain. 203 plants. Each had produced a full ear. Some had 2. He plucked one ear. He rubbed it between his palms. The grains rolled onto his skin, large, full, hard. He brought them to his nose. The smell of bread, real bread, warm, earthy, ancient. A smell that meant people would live. His father stood nearby. He looked out at the field. His face was different, not gray, not empty, alive. The wrinkles remained, the gauntness remained, but his eyes burned with a quiet, steady fire, like coals in a hearth that never goes out. He reached out and picked up an ear of wheat. He rubbed it between his fingers. He looked at the grains, then at his son, and he spoke. He said that the field hadn't lied, that the earth had truly awakened, that grandfather would be proud. Ju-hyeon stood there listening, feeling something tighten in his throat, not from sadness, from something else. From the fact that, for the first time in a year, his father was talking about the future instead of the past. The harvest took 4 days. The entire village pitched in. Byung-gu, Han-il, Min-woo, Tae-young, Yuna. Even Da-hee came with a sickle. Even the widow Nam. They harvested by hand with sickles and knives. The sheaves were tied and stacked in piles to dry. Minseo counted. Ha-eun recorded the numbers. 6,412 barley grains. From a single handful. The multiplication of life. The buckwheat ripened a week later. The pinkish-white flowers had fallen. In their place were dark, triangular seeds. The buckwheat yielded more than he had expected. The soil turned out to be ideal, acidic, moist, just what he needed. The chumiza didn't disappoint either. The golden panicles stood in neat rows. Beans. The pods were thick and full. Each contained 5 or 6 beans. Beans mean protein. Beans mean next year. Beans mean nodules on the root. roots, nitrogen. He pulled up a plant and showed Minseo the roots. See? Little white balls on the roots. There they are. That's what feeds the earth. They're little factories that take what the soil needs from the air, invisible. But without them, there would be nothing. Minseo looked at the roots. Then she took out a piece of charcoal and drew on the birch bark. Root, balls. She labeled it nodules, nitrogen, air into the earth. The first botanical drawing in the history of the village of Sonnim. They harvested the crop and divided it up. Ha-eun counted it, precisely, strictly, to each according to their labor, to each according to their contribution. Khan got a quarter for Hanelia, the manure and the goats. The blacksmith got a share for his tools. The rest went to Seo's household. But Seo's household now consists not of 5 people, but 10, including a baby, plus old man Pak, plus those who come for a bowl of food. Many mouths to feed, not enough grain. It'll last 3 months if they conserve it, 2 months if they feed everyone, not enough for the winter. But there's a cellar. In the cellar lay smoked meat, 4 hares, 2 pheasants, 1 young wild boar that Haneil caught in a snare at the mountain pass. The boar was large. The meat went into the smokehouse. The fat was rendered. The hide was salted. The bones were used for broth. Nothing was thrown away. Salted pork from the boar's breast. Ju-hyeon's recipe. Brine of precise concentration. The salt came from the merchant Oma, who passed through the village in early summer and left a sack of salt in exchange for sea buckthorn cuttings and a small bag of tatsuo seeds. Yes, the tatsui grew. Those unknown seeds that the merchant considered trash turned out to be exactly what Ju-hyeon thought they were. Brassica rapa subspecies nerinosa. Leafy greens. They grew in the greenhouse in 30 days. Tender. Juicy. The flavor is mild, almost sweet. Mother tasted it and froze. Then she added it to the soup. The soup became different, vibrant, green. Tatsui isn't buckwheat. You can't make porridge out of it. But fresh greens in winter, when everyone else is eating bark and straw, are a miracle. And this miracle can be repeated. Ju-hyeon collected and dried the tatsui seeds. Next year, he'll plant more. Da-hee stamped a mark on cellar lock, a small mark stamped into the iron. Yoon, the first of many. She was now forging every day, not just for the Seo household, but for the entire village. Knives, sickles, hinges, staples, and pike tips. Blacksmith Yoon Tae-gil stepped aside, not out of weakness, but out of pride. His daughter forged better than he did, more precisely, with finer craftsmanship. He sat by the workshop wall and watched her work, and drank less, because watching his daughter work was more interesting than drinking. Hwang Cheol-su sent the first demand at the beginning of the 9th month. A messenger rode up on horseback, a small official with a thin beard and shifty eyes. He brought a sealed document, a voluntary donation for the repair of the county road, 3 sacks of grain, from the village of Sonnim. Deadline, 10 days. Father read the document. His hands didn't tremble. His face didn't turn pale. He handed the document to Ju-hyeon, silently, like passing a weapon before battle. Ju-hyeon read it. 3 sacks. They didn't have 3 sacks. Their entire harvest of barley and buckwheat amounted to 4 sacks. To give up 3 meant being left with just 1 for the winter. For 10 people, 1 sack. Death. Slow, but certain. Hwan knew. Of course he knew. That was the whole point. Not to take the grain, to crush them, to show who's in charge, who decides whether this village lives or dies. Ju-hyeon sat down, he thought. Ha-eun sat beside him. She was thinking too. She said they couldn't pay. If they paid, there would be a second demand, and a third, until he'd squeezed everything out of them. But they couldn't refuse either. Refusing an official with a seal was a crime. The punishment ranged from caning to execution, depending on how you looked at it. Ju-hyeon nodded. So, don't pay and don't refuse. A third option, stall for time. 10 days is 10 days. A lot can be done in 10 days. He sent the messenger back with a reply, polite and courteous. The village of Sonnim is grateful for the honor of serving the county. The grain will be harvested, but the village is poor and needs a few extra days to thresh and dry the grain. It requests 15 days instead of 10. The messenger left. Ju-hyeon turned to Ha-eun. He told her to write a letter, not to Hwan, not to the magistrate. Next, to that man from her father's stories, the one in Seoul who listens to what's happening in the provinces. Ha-eun looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She picked up a brush, some paper, and sat down to write. Meanwhile, Ju-hyeon went to see Han. The conversation was difficult. Han didn't want any trouble. Han wanted peace. Han had survived his whole life by keeping a low profile. He paid, he kept quiet, he endured, and he stayed alive. Ju-hyeon told him straight out, if Sonnim paid Hwan 3 sacks, the village wouldn't survive the winter. Everyone would die. Slowly, by spring, including Han and his sons and his goats and his chickens, everything they had built over the past year would go up in flames, because 3 sacks aren't the end. They're the beginning. Hwan will keep coming back, again and again, until there's nothing left. Han listened, his face as hard as stone. Then he asked what the boy was proposing. Ju-hyeon made his proposal. The village would pay 1 sack, not 3, but 1, and not with grain, but with acorn flour, high quality, soaked, dried. 1 sack of acorn flour looks just like a sack of grain. It weighs the same. You can't tell the difference by looking at it, but it's not tax grain. It's a substitute. Hwan will accept it because he doesn't care what's inside. He'll resell it. The middleman from Liaodong will figure it out later, but by then, it'll be too late, and the village will keep its real grain. Han thought about it for a long time. Then he said it was dangerous if Hwan opens the sack, if the middleman complains. Ju-hyeon replied that there was a risk, but the alternative was worse. 3 sacks meant certain death. 1 sack of flour was a chance. Han looked at him, then at his sons, then at the smoke rising from the chimney of his house, where his wife was cooking soup from the greens grown in the greenhouse. He nodded. The sack of acorn flour was sent on the 14th day. Han-il took it to the county office himself. He returned in the evening. He said that the official at the gate had accepted the sack and stamped it. He didn't open it. He didn't check it. He just tossed it into the granary with the rest. 1 sack out of 100. No one was interested, for now. Ju-hyeon exhaled. The first move had been made. Now it was time to wait. He didn't have to wait long. 5 days later, it wasn't a messenger who arrived. 3 men came, at night, without horses, on foot through the forest. Bandits, former peasants from the mountains, hungry, angry, armed with sticks and a single rusty sword. They hadn't come to steal. They came on a tip. Someone told them there was food in Sonnim. Someone showed them the way. Someone promised that the village was defenseless. Someone. Hwan didn't get his hands dirty himself. He directed. A dog at the gate. A hungry dog that had been shown a bone. The snares worked. Those very ones. The ones Hanel had been setting all summer. Not for wild boars. For people. No, not hunting snares. Signal traps. A rope stretched across the trail. A tin can filled with stones was tied to the rope. A person catches it with their foot. The can rattles. Simple, effective. The clatter rang out during the 3rd watch. Ju-hyeon wasn't asleep. He hadn't slept for 3 nights. He was waiting. He knew Hwan wouldn't stop at a demand. Hwan was checking. If the sack hadn't broken the village, it meant the village had reserves. That meant he needed to send people to take the rest. The logic of a predator. He jumped up. His father rose beside him, silently, a pike in his hand. Han-il was already on his feet. He'd slept fully clothed, with a pike by his side. 3 figures entered the village from the direction of the forest. In the darkness, they were almost invisible. Almost. But Han-il knew the path. He knew where they would come from. He stood around the corner of the Choi house with his 2 brothers, Minu and Tae-yang. 3 against 3. Even numbers. But Han's sons were well-fed and well-rested. The bandits were hungry and exhausted after crossing the mountains. The fight was brief. Hanel stepped out from around the corner and struck the first man in the side with his pike. Not with the blade, with the shaft. The blow sent the man crashing to the ground. Minu lunged at the second. He knocked him down, pinned him. The third tried to run. Taeyang threw a stick at his feet. The bandit fell. The pike pressed against his back. That was it. 3 men on the ground. No blood, no deaths. Ju-hyeon approached with a torch. He shone it on their faces. 3 men, young, thin, dirty. Their eyes haunted. They weren't bandits. They were peasants. Just like him, like his father, like Han. People whom hunger had driven from their homes and onto the trail. One of them began to cry, quietly, through clenched teeth. He said he had children, 2 of them, in the mountains, hungry. That a man from the local administration had promised 3 sacks of rice if they went to Sonnim and took whatever they could find. 3 sacks. For robbery. For one group of starving people to rob another group of starving people. And the grain would go to Hwan. Neat. Clean. The officials' hands remain unsoiled. The peasants have only themselves to blame. Ju-hyeon crouched down in front of the weeping man. He looked him in the face. He asked his name. The man replied through his tears. Kang Tae-sik, 32 years old, from the village of Chongbon, 4 ri to the north. The village is dead. His family is in a cave on the mountain, his wife and 2 children. They're eating roots and mice. Ju-hyeon listened. Then he stood up. He turned to his mother, who was standing in the doorway with Minseo. He told her to heat up some soup, enough for 6. His mother didn't ask why. She left. The bandits were untied. They were seated by the hearth. They were fed. The 3 men ate and cried at the same time. Nettle soup with acorn porridge and a piece of smoked hare meat. Food that, in this world, was more valuable than silver. In the morning, Ju-hyeon spoke with them. He offered them a choice. Option 1, go back to the mountains with 3 days' worth of food and never come back. Option 2, bring their families to Sonnim. Work, build, learn, eat, live. Kang Tae-sik looked at him, then at his companions, then back at Ju-hyeon. He asked why. Why feed those who had come to plunder? Ju-hyeon replied. Because they weren't the ones who came to plunder. Hunger came. They were simply following it. And because Sonnim needs hands, lots of hands. Winter is coming. The fields need to be expanded. Wood needs to be cut. Houses need to be repaired. There aren't enough people. 3 men are 6 hands, plus their wives. Plus, in a year, their children will be old enough to help. Kang was silent. Then he nodded. The other 2 did too. 3 days later, they returned, with their families. 7 people, 3 women, 4 children. Thin, dirty, frightened. The children didn't cry. Children who have been starving for a long time don't cry. They don't have the strength for tears. Ju-hyeon's mother came out to meet them. The winter of the 2nd year was milder than the first. Snow fell in the 10th month, a smooth, white layer. No blizzards, no storms, as if the sky had decided to give them a break. The village of Sonnim welcomed winter differently than it had a year ago. 7 inhabited households, 32 people, 4 greenhouses, 6 chickens, 2 goats. The smokehouse was running at full capacity. The ice cellar held enough meat to last 2 months. Grain in sacks, salted meat in barrels, dried wild garlic, acorn flour, beans, buckwheat, not in abundance, but enough to get by, to not fear every dawn. Ju-hyeon sat by the hearth and was drawing, not a field plan, a school plan, a small one, for 10 students, the village children, 4 from the Kana family, 2 from the Nam widow's family, Isu and Bo-mi, Han's daughter, 2 more from the neighboring village who came for food and stayed until evening. The teacher, Hein. She had already taught Minseo. Now she would teach the rest, to read, to write, to count, the basics, the foundation. Without literacy, there will be nothing. No records, no calculations, no future. Hyeon agreed, not right away. At first, she was silent for a long time. Then she said she had nothing to teach with. No paper, no brushes, no ink, no textbooks. Ju-hyeon replied that they would make the paper themselves. from rice straw, an ancient technique. Korea has been making paper for 500 years. He knows how, more or less. Brushes made from badger hair, ink made from soot and glue, a textbook. He'll dictate it. Hyun will write it down, with her own hand, in her own handwriting, with her name on the first page. Hyun looked at him, a long, lingering gaze. Then she asked quietly. She asked why her name had to be on the textbook. He replied, because it's her book. She wrote it. He had only suggested the content. She was the author. Ha-eun turned away. Her back was straight. Her shoulders were level. But when she spoke, her voice wasn't as firm as usual. She said that her father had dreamed his whole life of writing a book, a treatise on trade. He never wrote it. He drank it away instead. But his daughter would write a textbook for peasant children in a forgotten village at the edge of the world. Her father would have laughed or cried. She didn't know which of the two, maybe both. The three of them made the paper together. Ju-hyeon, Minseo, and widow Nam. They soaked the straw in ash, boiled it, pounded it into a paste, strained it through a cloth, spread it out on frames, dried it. The paper turned out rough, gray, uneven, but you could write on it, and that was enough. Ha-eun spent 2 weeks writing the textbook. Every evening by the hearth, by the light of an oil lamp, character by character, line by line, page by page. Minseo sat beside her and bound the finished sheets with coarse thread. Ju-hyeon had shown her how. A simple binding, holes with an awl, thread through the holes, knots. A cover made of birch bark. On the cover, Ha-eun wrote with a brush, "The first book of Sonnim village, compiled by Cho Ha-eun in the 13th year of King Hyunjong's reign." She held the finished book in her hands, thin, crooked, with gray pages and a rough binding. She held it and remained silent. Minseo stood nearby and waited. Ha-eun pressed the book to her chest for a single second. Then she straightened up. She squared her shoulders. She said she would begin classes tomorrow. The school was open. 10 children sat on the floor in the house of the widow Nam, which had become a classroom. Ha-eun stood before them with a textbook, upright, stern, her voice steady. The first lesson, numbers from 1 to 10. The children stared at her with wide eyes. Isu diligently drew strokes on birch bark. Bolmi chewed on her finger. Han's daughter, Mi-jin, sat with a face as stony as her father's, but she was listening. Sonhwa was teaching the others. She gathered the women of the village and began to demonstrate which herbs treat which illnesses, how to brew them, how to store them, how to recognize a fever, how to bring it down, how to treat a wound, how to make an ointment. Simple things, basic things. But in a world where the nearest healer was 20 li away and charged silver they didn't have, these simple things were worth lives. Yuna listened more attentively than anyone else. Her frostbitten foot had healed, not completely. 2 toes on her left foot remained dark and numb, forever. But she walked, she worked, she hauled firewood, and every evening she sat next to Sonhwa and listened to stories about herbs, wounds, and treatments. Once, Sonhwa asked her why she was doing this. Yuna answered briefly, so that the next time someone comes with a frostbitten foot, there would be someone to help right away. Not 3 days later, right away. Sonhwa looked at her. Then she nodded, silently, with a respect that needed no words. In the middle of winter, Lee Sa-rin arrived, not on horseback, on foot, disguised as a merchant's widow, with a single servant carrying a box of fabric, a disguise. A distant relative of the royal family does not travel openly through a starving province. She came because the letter had arrived. Merchant Ohm had delivered it. By some miracle, the envelope made it to Seoul and found its way to the right person. That person read it, became interested, and sent Seren his own eyes and ears to investigate, to find out truth or fiction, a cult or a miracle, a rebellion or salvation. She entered the village quietly. She looked around. She saw greenhouses, a smokehouse, children running around the yard, smoke rising from 7 chimneys. She heard Ha-eun's voice from the school, even and clear, counting from 1 to 100. Seo stood by the fence of the Seo family's yard and watched. Her face was covered with a scarf to protect it from the cold. Her eyes were calm, appraising. The eyes of someone accustomed to seeing the truth behind the facade. Ju-hyeon came out to meet her. He bowed. He invited her into the house. She went inside. She sat by the hearth. She said nothing. She watched. Her mother served her soup. Simple. Nettle soup with acorn porridge and a piece of smoked wild boar. An ordinary meal for an ordinary family. Seo ate slowly. Every spoonful, every bite. She tasted it. She savored it. Not the taste, the meaning. She had traveled through the provinces for 2 years and had seen hunger. She had seen villages where corpses lay by the roadsides. She had seen children with bellies swollen from hunger. She had seen officials eating from porcelain plates while people were dying outside the window. And here was this village, small, poor, but alive, where children learn numbers, where smoke rises from the chimney, where an unfamiliar guest is served soup with meat, in a year of famine. She finished eating, set down her bowl, looked at Ju-hyeon, asked, "How?" One word, "How?" Ju-hyeon replied. It took a long time, 2 hours. He told her everything. Lee Sa-rin stayed in the village for 10 days. She walked through the yards. She talked to people. She looked at the greenhouses. She touched the soil. She counted the sacks in the cellar. She listened to Ha-eun teaching a lesson. She watched Son-hwa sort through the herbs. She observed Da-hee forging staples for the new greenhouse. She saw Yuna return from the with a bundle of firewood bigger than herself. She saw Ju-hyeon's mother feeding the baby Son-ho, who was already crawling and grabbing everything in sight. She saw So Byung-gu's father standing at the edge of the field, looking at the straw-covered garden beds, upright, serious, alive. On the 5th day, Seo approached Ju-hyeon and said she would report the truth to Seoul, that the village of Sonnim was neither a cult nor a rebellion, that there was a boy here who knew the land better than any official in the county government, and that Hwang Cheol-su was a thief and a murderer who needed to be removed before he destroyed the only thing that worked in the entire province. Ju-hyeon thanked her. Then he asked her directly. He asked how long it would take for Seoul to respond. Seo answered honestly. Months, maybe half a year. The bureaucracy moves slowly. Papers take weeks to process. Decisions take months to make. Implementation takes years. Ju-hyeon nodded. So, half a year. Hwan wouldn't wait half a year. He needed protection here and now. Seo thought for a moment. Then she said there was one thing she could do, not through the court, but personally. She could speak with the magistrate, directly, not by letter, face to face. The magistrate isn't a fool. He knows Hwan is stealing. But he has no reason to intervene because Hwan shares the spoils. Part of the loot goes to the higher-ups, the usual scheme. But if the magistrate finds out that someone from Seoul is backing Sonny, not directly, but through hints, through shadows, then the situation changes. Protecting Hwan is cheaper than incurring Seoul's wrath. The magistrate will make a choice, the right one, not because he's kind, because he's smart. Ju-hyeon looked at Seo, a woman from another world, from a world of palaces, seals, and intrigue. She spoke of power the way he spoke of soil, in layers, in structures, balances, every word in its place, every hint calculated. He said he trusted her. She replied that he shouldn't trust her. He should verify, because trust without verification is foolishness, and foolish people are the first to be devoured by hunger. He smiled. She didn't. But there was warmth in her eyes. Seo left, quietly, just as she had arrived, with the same servant, with the same box of fabric, a merchant's widow returning from a trip to the provinces. Nothing out of the ordinary. After her departure, weeks of waiting dragged on. Winter weighed heavily, not from hunger anymore, from anxiety. Hwan remained silent. It was worse than if he had sent a new demand. An official's silence is like the calm before the storm. Ju-hyeon made use of that time. Every day, every hour. She expanded the greenhouses, the third and fourth ones. Da-hee built the frames in 2 days. Her hands flew. She no longer waited for blueprints. She saw for herself what was needed. She decided for herself. She did it herself. Ju-hyeon just nodded. On one of the frames, she stamped a mark, a small one, in the corner. Yoon. Then she looked at Ju-hyeon. He nodded. She turned away, quickly, but not out of embarrassment, out of pride. The smokehouse ran non-stop. Haniel caught game every week. Hares, pheasants, once a deer, a young one, a male. The meat went into the smokehouse. The hide was put to use. The antlers were ground into powder. Sonhwa said that deer antlers were medicine. Ground into powder, they helped with weakness and blood loss. She knew. 20 years of study hadn't been in vain. Sea buckthorn on the hillside stood beneath the snow, bare, silvery twigs, but alive. Ju-hyeon checked on them every week. He shoveled the snow away from the roots. He looked. The buds were swollen, strong. The trees would survive the winter. In 2 years, the first berries. He waited. Ha-eun taught school every day. The children were learning, slowly but surely. Isu was already writing his name. Bomi could count to 20. Han's daughter, Mi-jin, was reading her first simple texts. Hein was a strict teacher, demanding, uncompromising, but fair. The children both feared and adored her, just as they fear and adore a mountain, distant, indomitable, but reliable. At the end of winter, news arrived. Han Dix brought it. His face was heavy. His eyes were serious. He said there had been a reassignment in the county. The magistrate had received new powers from the provincial governor. As a result, Hwang Cheol-su had been removed from tax affairs, temporarily, pending an investigation. Ju-hyeon listened. His face was calm. Inside, a storm raged. It worked. Serin made it happen. Not a letter from Seoul. No, faster. She spoke with the magistrate, in person. She hinted about the shadow from Seoul, about attention from above. The magistrate made a choice, the right one. He removed Hwan from a key position. Didn't remove him entirely, suspended him temporarily, made it clear that his protection was over. Hwan was smart. He understood. But Hwan wasn't the type to give up. A week after his suspension, he sent to the village, not a messenger nor a bandit. He sent an accusation to the capital, bypassing the magistrate, directly, that heresy and a secret society existed in the village of Sonnim, that the boy Seo Ju-hyeon was preaching a foreign doctrine, that the village was harboring fugitive criminals, that ties to Seoul amounted to a conspiracy. The denunciation was well written, vague, with insinuations of treason. Ha-eun read the copy that someone from the village council had secretly passed to Han. Her face went pale. Treason. The entire family would be executed for this, down to the 3rd generation. Ju-hyeon read it, silently. He set the paper down. He looked at Ha-eun, at Minseo, at his mother, at his father, at everyone who had gathered in the house and was waiting. He said one thing: let them come, whoever they are. Let them come and see. It's heresy to hide things. We're not hiding anything. The greenhouses stand in the yard. The school is open. The ledger is in Ha-eun's hands. Let the magistrate come himself. Let the governor come. Let the van come. They'll see children learning numbers. They'll see a field that feeds 30 people. They'll see a mother bringing a guest a bowl of porridge with meat in a year of famine. And let them call it heresy after that. His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. He hid them behind his back. Minseo saw this. She approached. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, quietly, silently, like a wall. The magistrate arrived in Sonnim at the end of the 3rd month of the 2nd year. Spring was already beginning. The snow had melted from the fields. The stream flowed full and vigorous. Buds were swelling on the trees. The earth breathed dampness and warmth, promise. The magistrate arrived on horseback, with 2 officials, with 4 guards, and with Hwang Cheol-su, who rode behind them all, his face white and motionless as a porcelain mask. He had gotten his way. He came in person. He brought the inspectors. He expected to see confirmation of the denunciation, a sect, weapons, secret rituals, foreign books, something he could put on the table and point at. Here is heresy, here is treason, execute them. The village came out to meet him, all of them, 32 people, adults and children, in clean clothes, poor, mended, but clean. The mother had made sure that morning that every child was washed and combed. The widow Nam had washed everything that could be washed. Cain had tidied up the ledger and placed it on the little table by the gate, open, on the first page, so that anyone could read it. The magistrate dismounted. He looked around. He had expected poverty, or madness, or both. Instead, he saw a courtyard with greenhouses, from which green seedlings were sprouting, a smokehouse from which smoke was wafting, a woodpile against the wall, chickens in the yard, a goat tied up, children standing in a neat row, looking at him without fear. Hwan stood nearby, waiting for the magistrate to see what was described in the denunciation: heresy, a secret society, a conspiracy. The magistrate walked across the yard in silence. He peered into the smokehouse. He touched the leaves. He sniffed them. He went into the smokehouse. He examined the hooks with the meat. He came out. He approached the ledger. He leafed through it, slowly, page by page. Numbers, dates, harvests, expenses, names. Everything was recorded. Everything was out in the open. Hwan stood and watched. His face changed with every passing minute. It grew pale. It hardened. Because the magistrate found nothing. No heresy, no weapons, no foreign books. Only greenhouses with greens, and a ledger written by the daughter of a bankrupt yangban. The magistrate stopped in front of the school. He entered. 10 children sat on the floor, birch bark in their hands. Hein stood before them, upright, calm. She did not interrupt the lesson when the magistrate entered. She finished her sentence, then she bowed. The magistrate looked at the children, at the birch bark, at the characters. Isu picked up his birch bark and held it up. He had written his name, neatly, clearly. A 6-year-old boy from a refugee family had written his name. The magistrate watched. Then he turned to Ha-eun. He asked who she was. Ha-eun replied, Cho Ha-eun, daughter of Cho In-soo from Kilchu County, a Yangban family, now impoverished. She's a teacher. The magistrate nodded. He went outside. He walked the entire length of the village, all 7 courtyards, the field, the hillside with sea buckthorn, a stream, the smokehouse, the cellar. Ju-hyeon showed him everything, every corner, every stone. He opened the cellar. He showed him the supplies, meat, grain, salted pork. He hid nothing. He embellished nothing. The magistrate remained silent. An hour, 2. He remained silent and watched. Kwan followed him like a shadow, and with every step, his face grew paler and paler, because the magistrate saw what Hwan could not see, not the food, not the greenhouses, not the school. He saw order, a system, a functioning system that takes hungry people and turns them into living beings, that takes dead land and turns it into fertile soil. The magistrate returned to the Seo family's courtyard. He sat down at a small table. Ju-hyeon's mother approached him, holding a bowl, a simple clay bowl. Inside was millet porridge with a piece of smoked meat, an ordinary meal. She set the bowl down in front of the magistrate. She looked him in the eyes and spoke simply. She said he must be tired from his journey. Let him eat. The magistrate looked at the bowl, then at the woman, a peasant woman with a face gray from work and hands worn from toil, offering food to an official in a year of famine, when every bowl represents someone's life. She was giving hers away to a guest, because that's the custom, because that's how she was taught, because a man had come into her home. The magistrate took the bowl. He ate in silence, slowly, every bite. He finished. He set the bowl down. He stood up. He looked at the mother. Then he bowed to her, deeply, to the waist. A yangban bows to a commoner. The courtyard froze. The guards froze. The officials froze. Hwang froze. The magistrate straightened up. His face was red. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. He said he was ashamed that he hadn't arrived sooner. Ashamed that for 2 years this county had been starving and dying while he sat in the magistrate's office shuffling papers. ashamed that it took a denunciation against a boy for him to finally see what he should have seen from day one. He turned to Hwan. He looked at him for a long time, intently. Then he said 3 words. He said the denunciation had been rejected. Hwan stood there, pale, motionless, his lips pressed together. His eyes were dead. He had lost. Not because he was weak, not because he was stupid, because the world isn't structured like a pyramid, or not just like a pyramid. Sometimes a boy with a hoe stands firmer than an official with a seal, because behind the boy stand 32 living people, and behind the official only paper. The magistrate left. Hwan left with him, under escort, not for the accusation, for the double-entry bookkeeping that Ha-eun found in the tax records, and showed the magistrate while he was leafing through the ledger, quietly, between the lines, just as a woman of the Yangban clan knows how to do, not an accusation, an observation. The magistrate drew his own conclusions. The village stood at the gate and watched as the horsemen rode away. Mother, father, Minseo, Ji-eun, Yuna holding the infant Sonhwa in her arms, widow Nam with her children, Hyun clutching a textbook to her chest, Da-hee, her hands covered in soot, Sonhwa with a bundle of herbs, Han Dix with his arms crossed, Hanil, Minu, Tae-young, Kang Tae-sik with his wife and children, Old Man Park with his cane, everyone, 32 people, alive. Minseo approached Ju-hyeon, quietly. She handed him an envelope, a small one, sealed. A messenger had brought the envelope from the south, just a moment ago, while everyone was watching the magistrate leave. Ju-hyeon took the envelope. He looked at it. Instead of a return address, there was a single letter on the envelope, not a Chinese character, a Latin letter, M. He broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thin, expensive paper, neat characters, beautiful handwriting. The letter was short. The author wrote that he had been observing the village in the north for a long time, that he was delighted, that he wanted to meet, that the two of them were the only ones in this world who understood its true nature, that the author had a proposal, an alliance, a union of knowledge, a common goal. The last line was in English, not typed, handwritten in Latin letters with a brush on Korean paper. We are not alone anymore. Ju-hyeon stood in the courtyard. The spring wind fluttered the paper in his hand. The village bustled around him. A living village. His village. Behind him, his mother was humming by the hearth. Minseo was writing something on birch bark. Da-hee was hammering away at the blacksmith's forge. Ha-eun was reading aloud from a textbook to the children. Songhwa was hanging up herbs to dry. Yuna was rocking Song-ho. His father stood at the edge of the field, gazing at the land that had awakened. He had built all of this, not alone, with them, but he was the first seed, the one that fell into the frozen earth and sprouted. And now, another outsider knew about him, a man who had spent 3 years building something in the south, not a farm, power. And this man wanted to meet him. Ju-hyeon folded the letter. He put it in his pocket. He looked at the sea buckthorn on the hillside, 5 small trees with silvery leaves. In 2 years, they would bear their first berries. He had promised old Lady Beck to send her berries from the first harvest. He would keep his promise. He looked out at the field. The barley was already in the ground, the second season. Of the 6,000 grains from last year, he had sown 3,000. By fall, there would be 100,000. In the 3rd year, 1,000,000. Exponential growth. Math doesn't lie. He looked at the school. 10 children. In a year, 20. In 3 years, 50. Children who can read and count and heal and sew. Children who will grow up and pass this knowledge on. Living seeds. The most important ones. He looked at the village. 7 households. 32 people. A year ago, there were 6 households and 25 people, and half of them were waiting to die. Now no one is waiting. Everyone is working. Everyone is living. Everyone is thinking about tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. He returned to the house. He sat by the hearth. His mother handed him a bowl of porridge. He ate. Then he looked at his family, at everyone. His mother, his father, Minseo, Ji-eun, the widow Nam, Isu, Bomi, Hyun, Yuna, Sonho, Sonhwa. His family, not by blood, most of them aren't, by choice, by bread, by the land they've built together. He thought about the letter M, about the man in the south, about what lies ahead. War, not with swords, with ideas. Two outsiders, two paths, land or power, bread or the sword. It won't be easy, it might be scary, it might be dangerous, but he's no longer alone. He has Minseo, who remembers everything, Ha-eun, who calculates everything, Da-hee, who builds everything, Yuna, who can carry anything any distance, Sonhwa, who heals what the earth cannot, Serin, who sees through palace walls, a father who stands tall and alive in the field, a mother who brings a magistrate to his knees with a single bowl of porridge, and 32 people beyond the walls of this house who, a year ago, were the dead, but now are proof that things can be different. He finished his porridge. He set the bowl down. He went out into the courtyard. Evening. The sky was pink and clear. The first stars were out. Somewhere far to the south, a man with the letter M was also looking at this sky and thinking about him. Ju-hyeon stood there, breathing in the cold spring air. Then he smiled, quietly, to himself, and he walked toward the field to check on the barley.